It is said that luck is the intersection of preparation and opportunity. My name is Tobias and welcome to Australian Hunting Backcountry, a platform where we will focus on all things around hunting in the backcountry, not just in Australia and New Zealand, but everywhere that backcountry hunting is possible. Every hunting trip should be a journey of learning, so join me as we explore gear, tips, techniques, hear lived experiences and discuss the unique places that backcountry hunting can take you. I appreciate you coming along with me as I try to increase our knowledge and help us seek out opportunities so that we might have better luck in the backcountry. For 2025, Australian Hunting Backcountry is proudly partnering with Nature's Perks and Gun Traders Australia. Nature's Perks, your gateway to the outdoors. Lawson and Jesse, the team behind Nature's Perk, are passionate about sharing the joys and benefits of hunting and fishing. They offer a range of membership options which give you opportunities to win amazing gear, learn from the best, experience unforgettable adventures and exclusive member perks. Your membership enters you in regular gear giveaways to win top quality hunting and fishing equipment. You can enhance your skills with their comprehensive hunting education courses available both in person and soon online. Your membership will include exciting draws for guided hunts and fishing charters, creating memories that will last a lifetime. And you can gain access to unique opportunities and experiences that are available only to their members. Join the Nature's Perks community today and unlock a world of outdoor adventures. Visit naturesperks.com.au to learn more and choose the membership that's right for you. Gun Traders Australia is a family-run, secure online platform for firearm enthusiasts across Australia to buy and sell firearm parts and accessories. The guys there are dedicated to fostering a community where responsible firearm ownership is paired with exceptional service and access to premium products and trusted providers. What sets Gun Traders Australia apart is a modern and user-friendly online platform with reliable search filters, making finding what you need even easier. The server is hosted right here in Australia, ensuring fast and reliable access, and a payment portal that is also proudly Australian-based, providing secure transactions without any information stored offshore. Check them out at guntraders.com.au. Welcome to this episode of Australian Hunting Backcountry, and today I am going to discuss some reloading for long-range hunting. We're going to take a bit of a deep dive into it, and on this episode I'm joined by Fergus from Melbourne, Victoria. Fergus, thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Fergus actually reached out to me after listening to the episode I did with Josh Price from Alpine Accuracy on long-range hunting there. And Fergus has quite an extensive background in hunting and long-range shooting on a competitive level. So we got to chatting for a bit, and decided to be a really good idea to do this recording with Fergus. So again, Fergus, thanks very much for reaching out and making the offer to come on board. So give us a background about yourself then, and sort of how you got into the long range shooting and your competitive resume, I guess you could say.
Sure. I mean, I started off very much as a hunter foremost, and I'm basically self-taught as a hunter and a shooter a lot of the time, although obviously I've had a lot of influences over time as I've learnt more and more and met more and more people. But my main start, I guess, into, well, firstly hunting, I started like a lot of people where I was just shooting rabbits with a rimfire and very, very minimal knowledge of anything at that point in time. And I've been very driven, I guess, to expand my knowledge and do more, particularly in the early days, more hunting. And a friend of mine that I met along the way, the two of us used to hunt a lot together. We would go in the early days both bow hunting and rifle hunting into New South Wales and southern Queensland, and even the two of us did a trip up to sort of northern Queensland into some of the more remote country where the the boars would stand there and stare at you instead of running off like mad, which is what we were more used to. And that friend of mine, Bob, who passed away in 2008, but prior to that, the two of us spent a lot of time hunting together. He also had a big interest in competition shooting, which at the time I wasn't that drawn to. But he was not particularly computer literate. My background's a lot of towards technology, and back in those days in the 1990s, the internet was a lot less friendly and a lot less resources. You had to really know where to go and find things, and I started asking questions online about what we wanted to know and understand better, and that led me to meeting up with guys in Australia who were into similar interests, and that sort of led to us actually starting to travel a bit more and going to a few of the early competitions. So things like 500 metre fly shooting in Canberra, 1,000-yard bench rest in Canberra. Myself and Bob started attending those matches and started to get some exposure that took us beyond just the amateur level that we were at initially, where we were just shooting down at the Little River Double SAA range, which is a 500 metre range, and we were just teaching ourselves how to shoot at that stage out to any kind of distance, and that exposed us much more towards formal competition. And I started to find that I enjoyed that, and then I started to travel a bit more, go to more venues to shoot and meet more people, and from there I got a bit of an interest in trying to, I guess, improve my ability and become more competitive. And then I started to focus on things like making the Australian team for bench rest matches, which I did, and I travelled to 6 World Championships from 2002 up until 2017. And I also travelled overseas. I shot the US IBS Bench Rest Nationals, which is a 1,000-yard national shoot. And I ended up coming 10th in one of the categories there. At the end of the first day, I was leading, and then I had a bit of a mishap the second day and finished 10th. But the Americans told me afterwards they were getting pretty worried because they thought I was going to win after me leading for the first day. They thought they were all going to get beaten by an Australian, but that didn't quite turn out to happen. But I also, because of my interest in hunting, my interest in long-range shooting, I started to then delve more into the applying some of the technology of the day, which is much less advanced at that time than what it is today. But I also, like when I was in America, for example, I met a lot of guys over there, guys like Bruce Bear, who's a Pennsylvanian gunsmith, and he focuses on competition rifles, but there's a real long-range hunting culture in Pennsylvania. There has been, like, going back to the 1950s. And so starting to talk to guys like that, and Bobby Hart, who is Hart's Rifles, which is that's second generation now. His father started that business. He's still running it, and you can see Bobby on some of the episodes of things like the Best of the West hunting show, that you can see episodes of that on YouTube.
Yep.
So talking to some of those guys and seeing what they were doing was interesting, and of course that was applicable to things like Sambar in Australia. You know, they're doing it on elk. I wanted to do it on Sambar. So starting to apply that, and really sort of juggling both of those, because it's expensive to compete internationally, it's expensive to hunt internationally, it's expensive to invest a lot into the technology. I mean, back in the early days, there were very basic things that there's far more technology and resources available today in those areas. Scopes, for example. I mean, I remember when Night Force came on the market, and that was really groundbreaking at the time. There was nothing like that available up until the 1990s, when they started to focus on that segment, and they brought out initially the Bench Rest and Varmiter series scopes, and then they introduced the NSX, and those were really a bit mind-blowing, because prior to that, you know, when you dialed elevation, you counted every single click on the turret, because you didn't trust the scope. You didn't just dial however many minutes, because you weren't that confident that it would actually equal that many minutes when you dialed it. You counted every individual quarter-minute click until you were at you know, 9 inches, 10 inches, 15 inches of elevation, because you couldn't rely on the scope. And Night Force really changed that. So from that perspective, it was just something that was quite mind blowing at the time. But of course, now there's just so many choices in that area. But, you know, it's one of those things. It perhaps wouldn't have happened, or it might have been slower. Or, you know, having Night Force as a benchmark was a big deal at the time. And there's a lot of great alternatives now. You know, Night Force is just one of many choices that we've got. There's a lot of great options now. Yep. So things like that, looking back, you know, I mean, I started using burger bullets in the 1990s. They were very unknown. We had to mail order them out of America, and you know, there was nothing else on the market. And then I think it was in the early 2000s, Hornady came on the scene with the AMAX bullets, which was just all of a sudden doubled our choices of long-range bullets. And so there was just so many things like that. And of course, now there's little niche bullet makers in America, in Australia, in New Zealand, that are all catering to that sort of niche and producing some great products. So we've just got so many choices now compared to what we used to have.
And you're saying before when we were chatting, you and I are of the vintage where we can remember a day before the internet existed, and the pre-internet forum sort of thing that you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, back in the early days, I started off looking for information, and that led me to things like mail serve lists, which were things like rec.guns and rec.benchrest and those sort of things. So you basically subscribed to the conversation, and then every time somebody posted, they were doing it as an email. So you got this constant stream of emails that you had to wade through. But you know, there was it was direct access to fantastic information. I mean, Gail McMillan, who started McMillan Stocks in the 1970s, he was on there and he would answer questions directly. You could literally go to someone who would, you know, expertise that I just couldn't get access to otherwise, and ask them a question. And it was just really good fun being able to talk to those guys and develop a bit of a relationship. And you had guys like Walt Berger answering questions on reloading and bullet making and external ballistics and all those sort of things that you just could go straight to those guys, and it was just great information. And of course, nowadays there's a lot more of that information available, but the downside is, you know, signal to noise ratio. There's so much out there, but actually cutting through it and understanding what to listen to and what's actually valuable information, you know, it's sort of a double-edged sword. But back then you really could just go straight to some of those guys, and it was just funny, you know. I mean, you'd have conversations with people, and just like Gail McMillan was quite a funny guy, and somebody came on one of the discussions one time and asked what's the best caliber for shooting prairie dogs in America, and Gail, who of course made 50 BMG rifles, said, oh well, the best calibers are 50 BMG, because even if you miss the prairie dog, the bullet will suck their brain out through their ear as it whizzes by their head, you know. And it's just funny having those conversations with guys like that, you know. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed today. It's great having the level of information we have, but you know, it's like anything. You look back on the old days and think, gee, it was good back then.
Yeah, and I guess, like you said, it's a double-edged sword as well, because everybody's got an opinion, and the internet has given everyone a platform to be able to express that opinion. And sometimes you read some things on some of the forums, and you wonder how that you honestly think the person is having a go. They're joking, because it's just so wrong. It's not even measurable how wrong it is. So
yeah, I mean, the problem I think today is the internet gives everyone a voice, and the problem with that is that you get a generation of people that think that makes their opinion incredibly important and the source of information, whether they know anything about it or not. You know, I find this a lot, where people will watch a YouTube video and suddenly think that makes them an expert on the subject, and then they want to start giving advice on something that they clearly know nothing about. And I think there's a lot of downside with that. And the problem as well is that you can get somebody new into a conversation, and it can be very difficult to actually pick between somebody who sounds like they know what they're talking about, sounds quite impressive, but actually is not a particularly good resource, versus somebody who actually does know what they're talking about and has really good information to put forward. And it can actually be, like I say, signal to noise ratio. It's very difficult at times to understand. You're hearing a lot of things, and often those things can be totally contradictory and conflicting. And then, perhaps as a novice sitting there trying to say, well, which one of those opinions do I listen to? And often they are opinions. And when you ask for information, I think a lot of times people tend to, they obviously answer from their own perspective and their own knowledge base and their own experiences, but sometimes that's a very thin band of information. But they can come across quite knowledgeable, and that can really send somebody off down a totally incorrect path, or they might waste time, money and effort on something that turns out to be a total dead end. And it can be really difficult to get across, how do you filter that?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And like I said, there's opinion, and then there's knowledge that's based on experience and evidence. And somebody may have an opinion that's based on a very small data set of knowledge and experience. Doesn't necessarily make them wrong, but at the same time, if they don't have that background behind them, then it's hard to, and it's hard to know that whether that person does or doesn't just by what they're typing on an internet forum or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to have access to that knowledge base, but you've just got to be, I guess it's, as I say, the further along the learning curve you are, the quicker you can actually understand what you're hearing and who perhaps to listen to more so than who to maybe tone out of the conversation a bit, just, or be prepared to move on when somebody posts something that you just think, no, that's, I just can't get on board with what they're saying there. And I don't have to have an argument with everyone online. I'm not trying to convince everyone that I'm right and they're wrong, but I'll certainly sort of, there's people where I'll pigeonhole them and go, yep, I'll just move on from that conversation. Whereas there's somebody else I might go, yeah, they're really, I can see their track record's pretty good and I want to hear what they're saying.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So I guess since we're sort of here to talk about long range hunting, let's maybe start with what you consider is the definition of long range.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And I think it's something that I think it's very open-ended, I guess is the short answer. And it really is down to the individual to define somewhat what they consider to be long range, because I'm very comfortable shooting at ranges that a lot of other people would be uncomfortable shooting at. And there's I don't think there's a fixed number, but I guess is what I would perhaps say. I mean, and we sort of see two extremes there, I think, where we touched on this a little bit in the sort of pre-show discussion. But I think on the one hand, you've got people who have historically shot 100 meters, 200 meters, and they haven't really ever felt the need or perhaps the confidence level to go beyond that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm never going to criticize somebody for putting limits around what they feel comfortable with. I mean, that's number one from a hunting ethics perspective. I really hate it when people start talking ethics and saying X is not ethical and Y is the only thing that you can do, because I really feel like ethics are an internally generated standard around what are you comfortable in doing. And I have, again, talking about internet forums, I have had people tell me that I'm totally unethical because I shoot an animal at a distance that they don't consider acceptable. And I think that's complete rubbish. I do understand where they're coming from somewhat, but they're talking in absolute terms, which I don't think apply. I think you've got to be able to put it into a perspective that's right for you. I mean, it's something, it makes as much sense to have that discussion as to say, well, I'm a Formula One driver and I think you should drive everywhere at 300 kilometers an hour. And clearly that's not applicable to everyone. But equally, you can't say, well, I'm only comfortable at driving 60 kilometers an hour and the entire country should only ever drive at 60 kilometers an hour. That doesn't make any sense either. So those sort of absolutes I don't really like. So for me, I guess I would say that when you start getting into territory where you've got to start to dial elevation and you've got to start to be aware of the wind, that's where you're starting to get into long range. And then the further out you get, I would say that the 400 meter mark, the 500 meter mark is where that territory starts, and there's almost no limit on where that stops. I mean, when I say there's no limit, I mean it should be up to the individual to work out what are they comfortable with, what do they have the resources to practice to, what are they comfortable with in the terminal performance of their rifle. Those factors really should then guide them to what is that upper number. So for some people that might be 500 meters, it might be 600 meters. For another person it might be 1,000, and they're all right. All of those answers are right, but they should be at the individual level to make that decision. I think it's just really about at what point are you confident that you can ethically and humanely take that animal. That's what it really comes down to. That's the most important factor, and that's got to be what guides us on everything else. So I think for me and for a lot of the people I know, we're very dedicated. We spend a lot of our time practicing. I shoot a lot of competition, particularly from sort of closer range out to about 500 meters. That's the stuff that I do a lot of. So that for me is real bread and butter stuff. Once I start to get beyond that, then I'm going to be looking much more at things like what are the conditions on the day, because I might take a shot at, I don't know, hypothetically 700 meters, 800 meters on one day because there's really mild winds, mild conditions. I'm really confident in my wind call, and I feel like that's a safe shot on that particular day. And another day, I might pull that back to even 400 meters. If it's really windy and the conditions are really rough and I'm nowhere near as confident about my wind call, and once you get into, say, mountainous conditions where you've got things like wind blowing up and down mountains, which causes both horizontal and vertical deflection and all of those sort of things, totally changes the situation. So it's a really long drawn out way of saying I'm hesitant to put a number on it, but I think, it really is important for people to understand their own parameters and what their capabilities are and what their equipment is, have that familiarity with their own abilities and the equipment they're using, and make those calls. I mean, just as an example, I mean, I would say as a general rule, my experience with Australians is that we shoot a bit more. The people that hunt in that sort of manner will shoot a bit more than, say, their counterparts in America. I think if you look at, I don't know if you know Phil Vallejo, he's he was at one stage, he's a former US Marine scout sniper, and when he got out of the Marine Corps, he became the lead trainer for Gunworks, for what they call their long range university.
Oh yeah.
And so, and he's quite active on YouTube. I mean, he's got a lot of good content out there, and he's really worth looking at a lot of his stuff. But Phil made the point in one of his podcast discussions that in his experience of training people through the Gunworks Long Range University, that the average annual ammunition expenditure or practice ammo, whatever you want to call it, of the people attending Long Range University, on average, they're shooting 20 rounds a year.
Yep.
Which is, I mean, it's just such an insignificant number. I mean, it's just such a bad number to be saying, well, these guys are now learning to be long range shooters. Good on them for learning, but it's actually led to a situation in some hunting camps where guides will actually put a number on how far people can shoot, because they've had the experience where people turn up with a long range rifle and say, oh, I can shoot out to 1,000 yards, but they just don't have the capability to do that. They have a rifle that's capable of shooting out to 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
They can't shoot to 1,000 yards. So, those sorts of things I think are a bit unfortunate, because people aren't being realistic with their limitations in that sort of situation, and it ends up giving everyone a bad name because people are expecting the technology to do the work. I've spent 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 US dollars on my hunting rifle and optics and the whole package. That makes me a long range shooter. Well, it doesn't. It gives you a great bit of equipment, but it's up to you then to be able to actually learn the skills. And even if you don't reload in that scenario, which a lot of them don't, they'll just buy Gunworks ammunition. And I don't mean to single out Gunworks, it's just they're a name that many people will know. Yep. There's plenty of other manufacturers that are promoting equipment to the same user base, but it's again, you can't just buy a piece of equipment and say, well, that's it, now I'm a long range hunter, any more than you can buy, a WRX and say, well, I'm now a rally driver or whatever. I mean, you've got a piece of equipment that's going to start to take you down that path if you then go and work with it and do all of the things that you need to. And of course, there's many things you need to do.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned ethics at the start of that, because it seems that anytime I have a conversation with anyone about long range hunting in air quotes, 9 times out of 10 ethics comes into the conversation, and ethics is very much a personal opinion, and like you said, your ethics are based on your knowledge, your skill, your training, your capability, which is very different to the next person and very different to the next person and that sort of thing. One of the things that I've said to a couple of people who've sort of raised that topic and the ethical question is that the simple, and this is a very simple answer to it, but the simplest way I can sort of explain to cover off on that question is that if you're confident at 100 meters, if you are confident with your rifle and your load and your ability at 100 meters, are you that confident with that shot at whatever X number of meters? So whether it's 300 meters, 600 meters, 1,087 meters, knowing all the factors that go into taking that shot, are you as confident as taking that shot as you would be at shooting that animal at 100 meters? And that sort of, and it's not a binary answer, but people need to sort of weigh up whether what percentage of confidence, I guess, they have with that 100-meter shot compared to the shot they're about to take.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to understand what they're actually capable of, what they think they could do, but actually what they can do. And I think one of the problems that I sort of see generally in the hunting community, sometimes we can be our own worst enemy because people somewhat want to beat each other over the head with ethics. It's kind of become a bit weaponized in some regards. And there's a trend with some people to sort of say, well, my ethics are better than your ethics and you've got to do what I do because I've got the best ethics. Yeah. And of course, all of that's rubbish. As I say, it's really applicable to the individual, and you can't say, well, because I can only do X, therefore you should only do X. And I think also people need to stop and think a little bit about ethics in a broader sense. I mean, to sit there and say long range hunting is unethical and to shoot out to 100 yards is always ethical. I mean, just as by way of an example, I mean, I hunted elk in America in 1999, and I was in it was a guided hunt. I was on private land in Montana, and there was another group of people there that pretty much they went every deer season, every elk season. They would hunt there with this outfitter, and the guide that I was hunting with was telling me about one of the guys from that group where the previous year he turned up with a 5-shot rifle. He had an opportunity at a deer at 100 yards. He emptied his rifle, never hit the deer. And the following year when he came back, his answer was he turned up with a 10-shot rifle. So, I mean, to me, no one would sort of question, is it ethical to try and shoot a deer at 100 meters or 100 yards?
Sorry, mate, my internet just decided to drop out then.
Yeah, you're just a little bit breaking up a little bit, but
Sorry, I we got up to the guy returning with the 10 shot magazine.
yeah. And I mean, my point with saying that is just that most people wouldn't consider trying to shoot a deer at 100 yards as an unethical thing.
Hmm.
However, in that particular individual's case, he was incapable of shooting a deer at 100 yards.
Yep.
So, I think it just really, it's one of those things that really sticks in my head because, his takeaway was, I need a rifle with more ammunition in it. Whereas my takeaway would have been, I need to go hit the range and start practicing because I'm getting opportunities that I can't actually, get onto. I
Yep.
can't actually follow through on.
Yeah. So in terms of reloading for hunting, then,
Yep.
um, where do you think sort of would be the area that people should be looking at as a primary? Like, what's the first thing they should be focusing on in terms of all the components? Would you say that projectile choice is going to be the first thing to focus on and for people to research and spend the most money on? Or where would you sort of go with that?
Yeah, it's actually a little tough to answer, but I guess there's a couple of things that I would say in terms of where do you start. I think there's an research is a great thing, but I think there's also the potential to overanalyze the subject. I see enough on the internet and on even on podcasts. I mean, I was listening to an American podcast where somebody was talking about getting into long range, and they gave quite a lengthy discussion about how they'd looked at the ballistics on a ballistics calculator. They'd looked at the ballistics of all of these different bullets in a caliber that they were interested in, and they'd settled on a particular bullet as being the winner, so to speak.
Hmm.
And the problem with that is you've really got to go out and get some real world data. I mean, a ballistic calculator is a fantastic thing, but you see some weird things where the reality of what you're using doesn't necessarily reflect what you're expecting it to from just theoretical outcomes that you've got up to that point. You've really got to actually, I think, use it as a tool to help you analyze some options, but recognize that things might change. So, I mean, just to give you an example, we set up my son with a 300 Winchester Magnum.
Mm-hmm.
We were expecting to run Berger 215 grain bullets, and we bought a new 1 in 10 twist 30 cal barrel, had it chambered up, started shooting, and we could not get a group at 100 yards, 100 meters under 3 or 4 inches.
Right.
And I mean, I was tearing my hair out because I actually loaded up some of those same bullets. He's got a 1 in 10 twist 308, got him to shoot those, and he was putting 5 shots into about 0.3 of an inch. So, I mean, they were going fantastic. So, what we did with a lot of testing, I actually went back to a 200 grain bullet, which had I think a recommended twist rate of 1 in 11 twist,
Mm-hmm.
and they still wouldn't group. And in the end, I got some 180 grain AccuBonds, and they shot fantastically.
Yep.
Now, the only thing I can attribute that to is maybe somehow that barrel got stamped as a 1 in 10 twist when it was a 1 in 12. But it's just to illustrate that some flaky things happen, things that shouldn't happen, things that on paper that wouldn't apply, but it actually did in this case. So you just never know what nuances you're going to encounter. So I just think the one thing I would caution against in doing that research is kind of betting the farm on one outcome that looks great on paper. I think you've kind of got to get a bit of a short list together with your research and then go out and actually verify. I realize if you're looking at investing in reloading equipment or investing in a rifle, you've got to obviously bite the bullet at some stage and actually buy stuff and hope for the best. But you kind of got to be a little bit flexible, I think, in the outcome. I think that there's two things that people tend to do at that initial stage. One is they tend to get a bit of analysis paralysis, where they keep looking endlessly for that perfect answer, and the reality is there probably isn't a perfect answer, or there's multiple answers that are near enough that'll do the job. And I think nowadays as well, it can be a little bit intimidating because there's so much good equipment out there. And again, I preface this by saying I'm not knocking the equipment, I'm not knocking the options that are out there. There's some fantastic stuff, but it's possible now to buy a $2,000 electronic reloading scale. It's possible to buy a $2,000 reloading press. It's possible to buy a $2,000 case neck trimmer. There's many things there that you could invest enormous amounts of money into. And I've heard conversations at the range where guys have, a couple of guys have been saying, oh, I hear if we buy this and this thing, our ammunition's fantastic. That's perfect. But it probably isn't required. Will it make great ammo? Yes, absolutely. It's good stuff. I'm not knocking it. But do you need to start there? No, not at all. I still reload most of my ammunition on an RCBS rock chucker press that I bought in the early 1990s. And I'm judging that on what does it do on the target. Am I hitting, small gongs at long range? Those are the important things to me, not the fact that in theory my ammo is fantastic. And, I don't sit there and check it with a run out indicator to see, is this only showing one point of deviation on the indicator. I just don't bother. What matters to me is, does it work on the target? Does it work when I'm trying to shoot something at long range? Does it hit what I'm aiming at? Do I have confidence that I can repeat that when I'm shooting on game out in the bush from less than ideal positions and what have you? Those are the things that really matter. So I think people might sort of look at things and say, oh, I can't really afford all the good gear, I won't even go down that path. And I think that would be a bit unfortunate. I think you can make really good ammo off reasonably budget equipment. You could spend a couple of $1,000s buying a press and dies, and a digital scale is handy. I've been using one for, I don't know, the last 10 years. I just used an RCBS Charge Master, and it does the job. I'm confident in that equipment, and I haven't had to spend enormous amounts of money to get to that point. Across the spectrum, yes, I've got a lot of money invested in bullets and dies and all the rest of it, and it's kind of a byproduct of what I like to do. But you don't have to invest a lot of money just to get started, and don't get too intimidated or feel that you starting off with that equipment makes a lesser outcome for you, because that's probably not the case.
Yeah, I remember I read an article just recently, and somebody went through and surveyed a bunch of competition shooters at an event. And they asked them a number of questions, and amongst them was, what press are you using for your reloading? And I think it was about 60% of the top 10 competitors were using an RCBS rock chucker, which I was genuinely surprised at, because with all of the advancements recently and things, all these new products coming out. Look at the Area 419 press, and they said short action customs and that sort of thing. I would have thought, sure as London to a brick, they're going to be using these high end bits of gear, but obviously they had gear that worked, and they didn't see the point in investing further into something that, the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, like I said, there's really good equipment out there, and you can spend as much money as you feel comfortable doing it, and it's great to have those options. But I should add that in most cases that I load for, I do my bullet seating with an arbor press. So I'm not actually doing that on the RCBS that I just mentioned. I'm mainly using that for sizing, and it's great for that. And then I'm seating the bullets with generally with a Wilson inline seater on an arbor press. And that gives me a few advantages. I've used one for 20 plus years. It gives me another what I found quite a handy capability, which is just recently I was at the range testing some loads in my 300 Norma. So just as an example, what I did was I actually through some charges of most likely what I thought would work for me, and I used just some little scientific plastic vials that I drop the powder into. So I'll do a couple of different loads. I'll just label what those loads are on the individual container. I can go to the range and I can just drop those charges in, seat a bullet and shoot. What that does for me is, rather than taking 10 rounds of this load, 10 rounds of that load, 10 rounds of the next load, getting there, finding that actually I need to be one grain down on what I was starting on, or maybe I want to go one grain up to try what that does. I've got a scale with me, so I can modify the load at the range if I want to just dump a little bit more powder in or take a bit of powder out. But I can drop those charges straight out of the little plastic tubes into the case, seat the bullet with the arbor press,
Yep.
shoot it, see what it does, and I don't come home with 30 rounds of ammo that I never actually shot off for whatever reason. It was too hot, or it was a bit lighter on than what I was expecting it to be, or that particular bullet didn't work out for me, or whatever. And then I can just dump all of that powder back into the powder canister when I get home, and it's really quite an efficient way of doing my load development. So I think those are little things. They're very low tech things. They're cheap to do, but they just make my life easier, and I can get to that good load really quickly, and I don't have a lot of extra stuff to deal with, and I'm not wasting cases or pulling bullets that then I don't really want to shoot because I'm worried I've dinted the bullet or something like that. So it's kind of then just a barrel fouler in the future, especially with the price of bullets these days.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. No, that's what I moved over to as well years ago, was the Wilson inline die and a K&M arbor press.
Yep.
And yeah, that convenience is good. I've done very similar sort of thing, but where I was shooting, I had a house nearby that I could go to, so I took my scales and so forth over and did a bit of reloading, and then raced back to the range and shot them off, and went back and did a bit more reloading. So very handy.
Yeah, well, for me, a trip to the range is an hour and a half each way, so I want to make sure I get the most out of it, and get to a good load as quickly as possible, and especially with primer availability and component availability and all of those things today, it's just handy to be able to keep that as streamlined as possible. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to beat. I think the Wilson dies and the K&M Harbour Press for bullet seating, they're just a very neat setup.
Yeah, yep. I bought my son a Wilson die for his 3006, and for whatever reason, it's out of the ones that I've got, this was the only one that was affected. The thing ended up rusting, and the bullet stem ended up rusting inside the die, so we had to throw that one away.
Yeah, I mean, the early Wilson dies were all just a mild steel. They've added in the option of stainless in probably the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. And it was quite frustrating. And of course, Queenslanders are going to cop it worse in that regard. Just, the conditions there make rust far more prevalent than it is for, say, me in Melbourne. It's still a problem, but it's not anywhere near as bad of a problem as it is further north. But yeah, look, I tend to gravitate mostly towards the stainless Wilson dies. I also use the Wilson full length dies, either a Wilson die or a bushing die from Reading, because I generally I don't use an expander ball in the sizing die.
Okay.
I basically just control my neck thickness with a neck bushing. I don't like neck sizing only. I really think you've got to address the cartridge case in the sizing process. I think it's really important to bump the shoulder back a little bit and size down the base of the case a little bit. Just a few thou I'm talking about, very minor, but it's important in my opinion. And the Reading and the Wilson neck bushing full length dies let you do that, and they give you a lot of control over how you're sizing the case. So that's been kind of my go-to for at least the last 10 years now. I've sized that way.
All right. Just while we're on that case there, just talk about that a bit more and sort of your case prep and so forth, and why that full length sizing is important to you rather than neck sizing.
Sure. So when I first was starting out on the accuracy journey, everybody back then was telling me you've got a neck size only, that once the case is expanded, that's a perfect fit for the chamber, that you never need to touch it from there, and you should just neck size so you're pushing the case neck down to grip the bullet, and that's all that really matters. And I did that. I bought neck size dies for most of the calibers that I was shooting at the time, and I started trying that, and I very quickly was tearing my hair out trying to understand why all of a sudden do my cartridges no longer chamber. What am I doing wrong? And I learned over a period of time that unless you're shooting extremely mild loads, you are expanding the case beyond the point where it will easily chamber, and you're then putting a lot of stress on the action lugs, or depending if it's another, not a bolt action, but another kind of firearm action, you may not even be able to chamber the cartridge. You risk sticking the cartridge in the chamber. Life just gets very ugly at that point. Whereas if you control that minimally, I'm not talking about resizing many thousandths. One of my bugbears is people that advocate using the chamber of your rifle. That's the perfect guide to resize your cartridges from, and that they basically say just keep sizing your cartridge down until it feels good in the chamber. Unfortunately, you can size your cartridge way too much doing that. It'll feel great when you've knocked the shoulder back 10, 15 thou, but it's just too much, and you're going to end up having a case head separation very quickly doing that. So it's about getting that line between overworking the brass and just not working the brass enough. I'm sure there'll be people screaming at the podcast right now saying I neck size only and it's fantastic, and that's great. If it works for them, keep doing it. For me, I was tearing my hair out. I just don't think it's a good way to do it. I think if you've got a die to chamber fit, in my experience, is really important and not well understood. If you've got a die that is similar to your chamber and it allows you to just minimally resize the base of the case, minimally push the shoulder back, that's about ideal. It's going to feed very smoothly, but it's going to give you a very long life on your case as well. I mean, as long as you don't overload it and blow the primer pocket out, or work hard in the case necks and split them, you pretty much will get a lot of firings out of that brass if you just minimally size it every time, and it'll feed beautifully.
What's the not necessarily the best way, because I know we hate questions like that, but what's the sort of, what are some ways for people to be able to measure that that shoulder bump and work out what's going to work for them?
I just use a vernier and a Hornady gauge. They have the one with the interchangeable inserts, so you just pick the appropriate insert for the appropriate cartridge that you're loading. And then I basically, when I'm setting my die, I will wind the die in to the point where I think it is undersizing the case. I don't want to push that shoulder back too far. I don't. A lot of die manufacturers will give you the instruction to screw the die in until it's making contact with the shell holder, and often that will actually be pushing the shoulder back too much. I prefer to actually approach it, kind of creep up on it, so to speak. So I will sit there, I'll lube the case, I'll put it in the micrometer with the shoulder measuring tool on it. I will basically get a measurement of the fired case. I'll put it into the die, size it, and I would expect that to be slightly at the fired dimension, or maybe as I slowly screw in the die. I mean, I'm talking maybe a quarter to half a turn at a time, just a few times, because I'm not miles away from having that shell holder touching the die. I'm just a little bit away from it, but I'm confident that I'm not going to push that shoulder back too far. I'll just slowly work my way over a couple of cases to the point where I'm pushing that shoulder back 1 to maybe 2 thou. I don't want to go any more than that, but I want at least that.
Yep.
And that's the sweet spot for me.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen Eric Cortina on his YouTube where he uses his bolt as the sort of like a go no go. So he'll disassemble the bolt, take the firing pin assembly and so forth out, so that the bolt's just literally a loose shaft in the action, and yeah, he'll keep bumping it down until he gets that bolt to drop, and then puts a piece of sticky tape on the back of the case, and it then should be met with resistance. So that's
Yeah,
sort of
I think the only thing that you've got to do in conjunction with that is actually measure the shoulder pushback, because that can go too far. It can feel great when you close the bolt, but it can be oversized. I mean, I found this out the hard way when I was first reloading. I'm mostly self-taught as a reloader, and one of the things that I still remember, I was pushing the shoulders back too far, overworking the brass, and I had very quickly incipient case head separation, so I could start to see the cracks in the base of the case. I mean, I've done plenty of things where I've screwed up perfectly good brass. I mean, another thing I did early on in the piece was I had my firing pin, depriming pin, I should say, basically. I was having trouble where I didn't feel that I was getting the primers popping out the way I thought they should do. And then I just kept winding it till I was comfortable with it, only to find out that I was basically extruding the base of the case into the primer pocket. And I could never see the primer after that.
Yeah.
You only make those mistakes one time, but it's an expensive learning experience. But I think it's okay to use the chamber and the bolt. And as you say, if you remove the firing pin and the ejector, then you have got nothing else bearing on the process as you're closing the bolt to influence and give you some false positives when you're working that out. But I think it is still possible to push the shoulder back too far. It can feel really good. The chamber closes really nicely. It's smooth. Everything feels fantastic. But if you measure that, you can be way oversizing the case. So I think you always want to be getting really clear data on how far that shoulder's going back. Really, I think I'm uncomfortable going back more than 3 thou. Anything beyond that, I think, is just too much movement. And I think for me, 2 thou's a sweet spot. Okay. The cartridge should chamber really nicely, but it's not going to oversize it. I mean, I know I've seen other people advocate 4 thou. I just think that's going too far. That's my personal comfort level.
Okay. And with the cases, how do you sort your brass? Like first of all, do you have any particular brands that you're particularly fond of, or does it vary depending on the rifle and the caliber? And then how do you sort that brass out? Because I've heard of people doing water weight measuring and other sort of measurements, batch weighing and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, in terms of brass, yes, brass quality really matters. I don't tend to use too much of the lower end brass that's on the market if I can avoid it. Now, in some cases, there may be a cartridge I want to shoot where I can't get something that's a premium quality brass. I mean, I've shot a lot of Lapua brass over a lot of years, and I liked it a lot. I actually found at one stage I had I had a Wildcat in basically a 7x57 neck down to 6.5 and blown out with an Ackley improved 40-degree shoulder. That was back before the 6.5284 brass was on the market, and really the only thing we could get in those days was Winchester 284, and I just didn't feel that was at the level I wanted it. I could get some RWS 7x57 cases, and I formed those into the case capacity that I wanted for a 6.5, and that shot really well for me. RWS brass is really good. Unfortunately, it's difficult to get in Australia, and it's expensive when you can get it, but it is extremely good brass. We're lucky to have had Lapua for so long. We've now got some great options. We've got Peterson brass, we've got ADG brass, we've got Alpha brass. They are still a bit hit or miss in Australia. There's not many. Probably Peterson's got a large distributor behind it.
Yeah, so brass brands, I have shot Lapua a lot. That's probably the single most used brand across the various cartridges that it's available for. That would be my brass of choice. I back before Lapua brought out the 6.5284, I developed, or I didn't develop, I started using a 6.5, basically a 7x57 case, neck down to 6.5, blown out with an Ackley style 40-degree shoulder. Shot very well for me, and I used RWS brass for that. And those RWS cases were really, really excellent. I also used RWS 375 H&H brass to form into a cartridge called the 308 Bear, which is basically a blown out 300 Weatherby with a 35-degree shoulder. So that's been really good brass. The RWS brass, which unfortunately is a little bit hard to find in Australia, and when you do find it, it's quite expensive, but that was really excellent brass in all of those cartridges that I used it for. So they're my preferences, probably those high-end cartridge companies. There's a few that have hit the market in the last few years, which is really good to have alternatives. Some of those are starting to turn up in Australia. So you've got Alpha brass, ADG brass, Peterson's brass. I've shot some of that, and it's been really good. It's a little bit hit or miss still in Australia, but it's shaping up really well. But having said all of that, I certainly will make do if that's all I can get is some of the more common brass. I prefer to use premium brass if I can get it. But, for example, my 338 Edge, I was using 300 Ultramag Remington brass to form that, and that shot very well for me, and that was really all I could get, so that's what I made do with. ADG does make 338 Edge. If I could get hold of some of that, I'd be interested. I've used a bit of Bertram brass in some of the cartridges that I use. That's all I could get in that particular chambering. So, I mean, to some extent, you make do, but if I have the choice, I will buy Lapua or something similar quality. That would be my preference.
Yeah. All right. And the second part to that question is then
sorting.
What are you doing with that brass in terms of sorting it?
Short answer is nothing. I've had a lot of conversations with people, really good match shooters, people that are world champions, people that are shooting at a very high standard, and virtually no one has seen enough of a benefit from sorting brass to really make it worthwhile. And again, look, I guess the one proviso would be if I was shooting ultra long range where you're shooting 2,000 meters plus, that is a different category altogether. And I don't want to say under no circumstances does sorting brass make a difference. But in my experience with what I've done in all of the distances that I shoot out to, where, I mean, I've shot out to probably 11 or 1,200 metres, I've never seen a need to sort brass personally. I just haven't seen a benefit from it. And if I don't see a purpose in doing it, then I just don't do it.
Yeah. And that comes back to the cost versus benefit sort of equation, if it really, and Brian Litz talks about that quite a bit. I know I saw a post that he did where they measured flash hole deburring, And basically across the spectrum, they found improvements over here, but then they actually found declines in accuracy and steer over here. So it was inconclusive. So basically, the end of the day, the way he does it is sort of here's the data. Now you go and make up your own mind. But basically, what it said was, you may see a benefit, you may not. You've then got to make up your mind as to whether the energy you're putting into this is worth, a potentially small increase.
And I think that goes two ways. I think one thing I see is that you get often on forums or in discussion with people who are starting out, they will look for the magic formula and they want to be told, if I do this one thing, this is going to cut your group sizes in half. And there is no one thing. There is, I keep equating it to, say, cars. If you have a car and you want to double the performance of that engine, it's not going to cost you twice as much money. It's going to cost you 10 times as much money, 20 times as much money. These are incremental small steps that we're talking about, and they're hard to quantify. There is no one thing you've got to do. But the flip side of that is, if it gives you confidence, by all means go ahead and do it. I would never tell somebody this is not worth doing, you should stop right now. If you feel comfortable that you get some benefit from it, then absolutely keep doing it. There's a mental game here, and if it helps your mental game, that's fantastic. By all means do it.
Yeah, yep, no, 100%. All right, and primers. What's your take on primers then? And because I again, this is another whole topic that people say you need this one because it's softer, or you need this one because it's harder, and particularly for hunting rounds, blah blah blah.
So I do think primers matter, but not in terms of that hard versus soft. If you need a hard primer because you're blowing primers, you're pushing your load too far, and you're looking in the wrong place for the answer. But I definitely, at distance, you can see a difference. I like Federal primers a lot, and I've used them in a lot of different cartridges. Certainly when I was shooting some long-range matches, I was getting vertical that I couldn't work out where it was coming from, and in discussion with some other guys, they suggested I switch to a CCI Magnum primer. This was a large cartridge that needed a large rifle Magnum primer to fire, and I switched to the CCIs, and that vertical that I was experiencing disappeared. So primers absolutely matter, but again, I'm judging off what I see on the target. That's the most important thing. If I'm seeing small groups on the target, or I'm seeing good dispersion on the target, I'm not seeing, wild, unexplained, horizontal or vertical or what have you, then that's great. If I am seeing some of that stuff, I'll definitely try primers, because that's one part of the formula that makes a difference in my experience.
Yeah. If you were changing your primer, like in that case you were talking about then, did you change your charge weight at the same time, or did you just monitor it?
So I didn't change. One of the fundamentals with this sort of thing is you want to only change one thing at once, because otherwise you're going to get into a situation where you've got no clue what's actually making a difference. So it's really important. If you think you've got a good load, but you feel like you're getting some unexplained shots, it's worth trying primers. But I would try and stick with only changing one thing at a time, and then trying to do it in a way. One of the things that people tend to do is they avoid shooting in the wind because they don't want to have to deal with it. They like shooting small groups, or they like hitting the gong every time, and they will avoid the wind. That's not a good thing to do in terms of training and trying to improve your capability. But, and even in load development, that's important, because this gets into, I guess, what I would call advanced reloading, and something that is very difficult to quantify. And some people are going to say I'm full of crap when I say this, but I have experienced loads that are overly wind sensitive, and some loads that seem to shoot through the wind. I mean, it comes back to You might sometimes hear the term Hummer barrels. Mike Radigan, a World Championship bench rest shooter, used to refer to Hummer bullets. But those sorts of things will shoot through. They will actually not react to wind in a way you would expect them to react. Where you would expect a certain amount of push from the wind or deflection, or however you want to refer to wind, you don't see it as pronounced as you would expect. And the flip side is you can sometimes see with a load, you may see more wind than you expect. And this is where you get into the fine line of, do you start blaming your equipment or do you blame yourself? And there are times to do both. And it's something that you will only get with a lot of experience to be confident to say, my equipment's faulty, I need to do something about my equipment, or I'm missing a condition. Is really difficult sometimes to differentiate. So there are times when it's good to shoot in a very light condition and verify what's going on, but you categorically need to also shoot that same load in a rough condition, because rough conditions can do really weird things to a load that seems to be tack holding. And I've seen it. I've also shot rimfire competition at a national level, and I've seen it with rimfire ammo, which of course is factory loaded, it's not reloads, but I've seen it with loads, centerfire loads as well, where I cannot account for the push that I'm getting on a given load. And when I compare it to, say, another rifle, I'm not getting that same amount of push from the wind, and it is the load that's doing it. It's something to do with the barrel harmonics, and I can't tell you a theoretical answer about what exactly is going on, but I can tell you categorically I can see a difference when I start changing powders or changing components, that previous vertical or horizontal just goes out of the rifle. You know, it's there with one load, maybe one powder, one primer, and it's gone when I change some components. So it's really important to try those loads under various circumstances. Once you think you've settled on a load, try it in a range of conditions just to really stress test it.
Okay. Yep. So, moving on then to probably the most confusing variable in terms of the reloading is the powder. When you're working up, or somebody came to you for advice and they said, I've just bought this X caliber, and I should point out as well that I'm particularly staying away from calibers, because that's a caliber discussion with you, because that's a whole other rabbit hole and perhaps a whole other podcast and so forth. And it from what I could see in the background before with the boxes of reloading dies and projectiles and so forth, and just from what you've said as well, you've obviously experimented with quite a broad range of different calibers as well. But if somebody comes to you and says, I've just bought this X caliber, hunting caliber, 300 Win Mag, 7 PRC, 338 Edge, whatever, where do you point them to start with for picking a powder?
So I would typically pick a powder based on the burning rate of the powder and matching that to the cartridge, but also to some extent the bullet weight. So if you were to take something like, say, the 300 PRC, it's one of the cartridges of choice lately. I would assume that somebody buying that wants to maximise the long-range ballistics of that with a heavy for caliber bullet. I mean, if somebody were to come to me and say, I'm going to buy a 300 PRC and I want to shoot 150 grain bullets as fast as I can, okay, that's fine. Maybe there's a reason why they want to do that. Probably not the way I would go with a 300 PRC. For that, you would probably want a faster burning powder for a lighter weight bullet. Yep. So I would probably direct them towards something like 2209 or 2213. They are sort of in that, for the cartridge size and the bullet weight, I think they're in an appropriate range. Anything below 2209 I feel is perhaps a little bit too fast. You could probably make them go bang and get bullets on target, but I think in terms of that sort of optimum burning rate to get good velocity, good performance, fill the case well. Those are sort of where I would be at. But if it were me setting up a 300 PRC, I would be going towards a 200 plus grain bullet. I would probably be looking at something like a 225 grain ELDM, 215 grain burger, something in that sort of a spectrum. Mm-hmm. So I would be looking at 2217, 2225, something in that sort of slower burning. You're going to get good velocities. You're going to get really good case density. I think, that match between the bullet weight, the cartridge size, and the burning rate of the powder is about where I would want it. So I would sort of try and match that up around bullet weight, powder burning rate for that given cartridge size. That's the sort of the formula that I'd be looking for.
Yeah, all right. Are you looking at fill capacity as well? Because obviously you sort of want it right up. Well, this is what I've been told, and what I've always sort of gauged as well is you want it right up around the 95 plus % capacity.
Yeah, I'm not going to obsess over it, but I agree. I think you want to be somewhere in that range. I mean, if I'm at 90% and I'm getting really good performance on the target, I'm not going to go, oh, well, that's no good. I've got to get better. And I'm not really, I'm going to be focused on what are the results that I'm seeing on target. I'm going to be chronographing the load for my ballistic table, but I'm not really going to be looking at extreme spreads, anything like that. That's not really anything that I think is particularly important to measure. I mean, in theory, it's important, but we see a lot of things where stuff that's theoretically important doesn't translate as a really important variable on the target. So there are things that you can, in my opinion, that you can not really obsess over too much. I mean, yeah, it's great when you get it and you see on the target that you're shooting well, you're hitting what you're aiming at consistently, and it happens to have a low extreme spread or that's great, but I'm much more guided by what I see on the target than what I think I should see in the results.
Yep. Well, welcome to this. Try that again. Welcome to this segment of Friends of the Podcast, and for listeners of the show, you will recognise the voice of my guest. It's his second time around. Lawson, welcome back, mate.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, all good. So I wanted to get you back because there's been some significant changes for you since we last spoke. So originally you were doing wild game on open flame and Balin, Scalen and Barbecue, and Far North Queensland Adventures.
Yeah, there's been a few. There's been quite a few, actually.
Yeah, right.
So the Up North Adventures was a separate thing altogether. That was just a guiding situation up in Cape York. Mm-hmm. That sadly no longer is around due to the property being sold.
Right.
So maybe in the future, I've got a few options to go back up there, but at the moment, with the way everything's going, I'll probably just stay down in Brizzy with the full-time work, and things happening here is pretty stressful. Can't leave it at the current moment. So, now we basically, Bailing, Scaling, Barbecue and Wild Game and Open Flame have kind of moved into Nature's Perks. So that sounds a little bit easy to say. Mm-hmm. Nature's Perks, and we're still doing the same thing. We've still got a YouTube channel, still got we're moving in towards a podcast. Haven't started that yet. Mm-hmm. We're going to do our education courses. We're moving that to online as well, and we also do our guided meat hunts, education hunts, and also giveaways. So we're quite busy.
Yep.
Obviously, you know that pretty well. It's pretty full on at the moment, but we're focusing on now is obviously our education courses. We're moving on to the online scene as well, but at the same time we do, on our days off, we do meat hunts, education hunts and the courses.
All right. So what prompted the move to Nature's Perks, and how did that sort of name, I guess, how did everything morph into Nature's Perks?
Oh, I think wild game and open flame is just too hard to say.
Mm-hmm.
Jesse and I had the discussion many times. We just wanted to rebrand. It just wasn't. It wasn't doing what we wanted it to do. The name's too long. People don't like typing it. So Nature's Perks is quite simple. You know, everything outdoors, fishing, hunting. It's nature, and you get a perk out of it. It's just, you know, wild game for us is our perk.
Yep.
So it was quite a simple choice. We Jesse and I only literally did it for 10 minutes. Name storming, and it just came. So it was a quick one.
Okay. And so you're running courses online and in person. What can people expect from these courses?
Yeah, so the online is not out yet. We have a subscription base, which is basically for the giveaways, but that will also be for the online too. So that just makes the deal a little bit sweeter. We're working on that. We've already started filming, but obviously, if you do a course with us, a weekend course, that will obviously be the same details, which we go through butchering. We show you how to skin a deer or a pig, and we go through the whole process of butchering it, breaking it down, getting into primals. We talk about how to find diseases, how to find cysts, basically just going through every little bit, what a butcher can do in 10 minutes, what the regular hunter who just goes out and shoots for a bit of meat. We're basically showing those people how to process their meat and how to obviously shoot it. So we go through simulator drills. We go how to find them. We go through spotting with binoculars and spotting scopes. Tracks. We do some simulator drills with the whole blood trail. Got that off your mate Mike from Deer School. So thank you, Mikey. Really appreciate that, mate. So we're obviously. This is our second year. We're still learning on how to do the best courses possible. But yeah, we bang out as much as we possibly can in 2 days.
Yep. All right. And you mentioned the membership base. So talk me through that.
Yeah, so we do 2 tiers, and that gets you just into behind the scenes.
That's per month.
Yeah, per month. Yeah. So you get to go into a giveaway. And a gear giveaway. This is more Jesse's kind of thing. He's probably the best one to explain it. But so the $20 and the $12 tier basically gets you all access. So you get to read articles, you get to see certain recipes, you get to go straight into the gear giveaways and the monthly giveaways. Or at the moment, we're going to make it 2 monthly at the moment, just because. We're just starting off with the whole thing. So our first giveaway is in February, and that was a meat hunt. And then our next one after that is a hound hunt, which with Steve Bojack up in Alpine Hounds in Victoria. So Steve's come on board to help us out, and we're going to do a giveaway with him. And a lucky winner, hopefully, will shoot a nice big sambar.
Yep. All right.
Yeah.
And what's sort of a future plan? Where do you see the Nature's Perks going to next, and then beyond that?
So we already started filming a bit of a series. So we're trying to slow it down a bit. We're trying to get our content, how do we say it, glossed off better. We're trying to. We spent a lot of money on camera gear. We've got a cameraman now on board. So we're going to try and film a bit more of what we do behind the scenes, what we do when we go hunting. Jesse and I love hunting just as ourselves. You and I have done a hunt before. I really want to try and focus on my hunting this year a lot more. I've done a lot of guiding last year, and I didn't get the satisfaction that I really wanted. I love the chase myself, and last year I kind of didn't get that feeling that I wanted. So I've got a couple of goals this year. I really want to get a stag, a red stag for myself. I went up to Cape York, and we got quite a few good pigs. and that kind of rekindled I want to start doing some more for myself. So we're looking at a 5 or 6 series filming, doing that. We're going to get a cameraman for that. We're going to make it really, really nice. We're going to focus on getting really good giveaways, promoting our giveaways, and really focusing on our content with the guys, like our sponsors, like Pro Tactical, Venture Hunting Outdoors, and so on, and gun traders. So really trying to help those guys that help us. So it's a process. There is an extra person on board now to give me a hand, but at the moment we're still trying to find our way, but we're kind of heading in the right direction.
Yeah, okay, that all sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, like I know you and I have spoken a few times about trying to do some stuff together this year, a few hunts. We've got some sort of tentative plans in place, so it's great to have you on board as a partner on the podcast. For those who are interested in knowing more, is there a good way to reach out to you to discuss it, and whereabouts are they going to find you?
Probably the easiest place is the socials. I get the messages, or if not, Jesse gets the messages. If you need it, if you want to know anything or ask questions, or if you just want to help out, be a sponsor, hit us up on the socials. This Jesse or myself will be answering it. 9 times out of 10, it's myself. But yeah, I really, again, mate, thank you for coming on and being a partner. And hopefully everyone's gone over there and read your article on your podcast. Hopefully we've got some more articles coming. So
yep.
Obviously we're trying to educate and get the word out.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we do have some adventures that we're sort of talking about and planning for later on in the year. So chances are we'll probably hear you on the podcast again in the future, and people will probably see a bit more of me on your website too.
Oh yeah, no, and hopefully we'll get you on the film too.
I've got a good face for podcasting.
Yeah, I think you're a chiseled man. The people want to see you, Tobias. So, yeah, no.
All right, mate. Oh, great. Thanks again.
Thanks, mate.
I'm definitely going to come back to your load testing and so forth. But just back on the powder, you're mentioning ADI powders at the moment.
Yes.
Are you a big fan of those, or is it just you just happen to be talking about them?
Look, I am. I mean, obviously there's many powder manufacturers in the world. I've shot a lot of Vitivari powder in competition, although that hasn't been as available in Australia the last probably 5, 6, 7 years. But I really we're super lucky to have ADI in Australia. We are getting access to some of the best powder in the world. I mean, that exact powder is the Hodgdon Extreme range, which is highly regarded in America. And, it's just rebranded ADI powders. I mean, every one of those powders that I mentioned is rebranded under another name, H1000, which is 2217, Rotumbo, which is 2225. I mean, they're all great powders. So
H4381 SC, I think is AR2213 SC.
Yep.
Like that.
Yeah, and 2208 is Varget. I mean, the list goes on. 2206, 2209. They're all popular powders in America. But the thing that they really have going for them is that, okay, the last few years haven't been perfect, but they're pretty much available. Whereas, I mean, Alliant powders, they've basically come out and said, well, while the war in Ukraine's going, there'll be no civilian sales of powder. Basically, for the foreseeable future. Even Vitivari's directing a lot of their resources into the Ukraine war. I mean, of course, they're made in Finland, and that's really right on their doorstep. So, I mean, just from a continuity perspective, but also the temperature sensitivity, I mean, back when I started loading, a lot of people really liked the Winchester ball powders. They got great velocity, 223. They were really, 243. They were really getting great velocity from those. And I tried it, and that was great. But I'd go out to the range in summer, and all of a sudden I'd be blowing primers because they're very temperature unstable powders. You know, you just can't rely on them. And you don't, especially at long range, you don't want to be looking at something going, well, am I going to be plus or minus 100 feet a second here? It's just too big of a variable. So not only, in my opinion, are they unreliable on the supply side, they also, not universally, but in many cases, they are very unstable by comparison to the ADI powders, you know. So that combination of being able to go and buy them, and, you know, lots of variation in ADI powders is not great, as in there's a little bit more variability than I would like, but I can normally pretty quickly get back on track with a new lot of powder, and I can buy them, and I'm not going to be worried about, is my rifle going to blow up in summer because, you know, all of a sudden it's generating massive amounts of pressure that it didn't do with a load I developed in winter. So I think for all of those reasons, ADI is just very hard to look past.
Yeah. That was my experience years ago with Alliant. I was loading RE22 in my 338 rum and went over to and developed a screamer of a load over here, and then for a trip to America, and we were hunting, chasing elk in November over there. And when I got over there, because of the extreme temperature difference, like it's super cold over there at that time of year, obviously. I had some real issues getting my rifle back onto paper, and then actually grouping. And I thought, something's happened. You know, the guerrillas at the bag chucking, section of the airport have done something to my rifle. I didn't realise that back at that stage that it was more than likely the temperature sensitivity of the powder.
Yeah, no, it's a real factor, and I just feel that I get pretty good stability with ADI powders in most of the rifles that I shoot, and that's something that's important to me. It's worth something to have that stability. And, you know, I think on multiple levels, there's still an element of people chasing velocity, and the more I shoot, the less important I think velocity is. Not saying it's unimportant, but trying to wring out the last bit of velocity out of a load, to me, is just redundant. You know, I mean, I've been around shooting since before laser rangefinders existed, and, you know, back then obviously it was much more of a challenge to actually accurately judge how you were shooting, and of course that is the origin of chasing every ounce of speed of a bullet. But nowadays, you know, laser rangefinders are just so good that you know exactly what your distance is, out to, you know, really now reliably out to beyond what anyone should be shooting at anything other than a piece of paper. So, you know, I'm far more looking at the wind deflection of the load and the bullet and what have you. That's the variable that's most important to me, because I can accurately judge what horizontal adjustments I've got to make, what vertical adjustments I've got to make. It's the horizontal adjustments that are really, those are the things that are still unquantifiable. And of course, eventually there'll be a technology fix for that. They're already working on it. But right now, that's the thing that is going to hit a steel gong or an animal or whatever. And that's what I want to get as much of an advantage on as I can. So that's really what guides me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, pre-laser rangefinding days, you know, we all drank from the Weatherby Kool-Aid cup, and it was important back then. We wanted the flattest trajectory so that we could literally, you know, we know out to what we thought was, you know, say 400 metres, we could just sort of hold on hair at the back line of the animal and squeeze the trigger, and, you know, we should hit somewhere in the kill zone. But nowadays we're really focusing on coming down, reducing that margin of error a hell of a lot more, which is a good thing for hunting.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, nowadays it's possible to be very accurate at ranges at a level that was almost unheard of even 10 years ago, you know, even 5 years ago. The standards have just gotten better and better and better. And what we're able to produce with ammunition and the platforms that we've got to shoot from, and all those tools that we've got at our disposal, we've really got the ability to be very precise, between practice in reloading, practice in shooting, having a well set up rifle, we can really wring the benefits out of that now.
Yeah. All right. So we've settled on projectile or a number of projectiles, case, primer, and powder charge, a range. So load up the ammunition. Now, bullet seating depth. Are you set to a particular depth, or do you let the bullet judge that? Like, what's your next step from there? Where do you're standing at the reloading bench, you've got all the components in front of you, and you're looking to set up your bullet seating die. How do you go from there?
So in most cartridges that I'm working a seating depth out, I will start by looking at what's my magazine length allow me to do, and I'll work with that, because in most of the cases I'm going to be magazine feeding. There are exceptions. My 338 Edge, that is too big to magazine feed with something like a really good ballistic coefficient burger or ELDM or something like that in it. It just will not fit in the magazine. So for that, the magazine length is not that relevant. But for most of the cartridges that I load for, I will magazine feed them. So I generally will start by looking at what's the longest I can load it out and magazine feed it, and then I'll try that on the target and see how it goes. And jumping and jamming, I generally don't jam a bullet. So to define that, jam would be when the bullet is seated out to the point that it's making quite hard contact with the lands of the rifling, whereas jumping would be that it's into the case neck enough that it's not actually touching the rifling, or it's just it might be just a few thousandths off the rifling, or it could be 20, 30, 40 thousandths off the rifling, or even more. So I would generally, I don't get too hung up on that on most of my rifles. Even my competition rifles, a lot of the competition I'm shooting nowadays is from the magazine. So it's got to be, if it's going to shoot well, it's got to be able to do it from a magazine. That's really the main criteria I'm working with now. And that, with most of the bullets of today, they've been refined to the point that they're not that pedantic about the seating depth. I mean, Berger VLDs, which was really the first high ballistic coefficient long-range bullet, were fantastic in their day, but they were renowned for being a bit difficult, a bit finicky to tune. But the more hybrid design that has become kind of the standard of today, most new bullets designed are a hybrid ogive. They are much more tunable, and they are generally pretty happy to be jumped. So, jamming them into the lands is not that important, and as in you'll still get good accuracy without it. So that's really where I start. I want to see what it does on paper initially, and then on a steel plate downrange, and then it's just going to come down to, can I consistently hit what I'm aiming at, and do I need to tweak anything from there? But most of the time, I am, probably surprising to a lot of people, I'm not that pedantic about the powder charge or the seating depth, and I really will start off by seating a bullet on. I work out from the load data what's the recommended maximum load, and I'll normally try and stop about a grain under that. I don't like to go right up to maximum, and that's, again, just from experience. If you are out in a rain shower and your chamber's wet, your ammunition's wet, you will see a pressure spike. If you're right up at a really hot load, you will get hot. So I prefer to be a little bit lower just to have that bit of leeway, because practical use in the field having a really red hot load, you are going to encounter some problems at some stage. So I like to basically work up a load where I'm probably middle of the range to a little bit above middle of the range, but under maximum, where I think I'm getting decent velocity for that's appropriate for that particular cartridge and that bullet weight, and then see what it does on target. So what I'll normally do to test a bullet as a starting point, will go to the range, I will get a zero with that new load at 100 metres. I'll adjust my turrets on my scope to that load at that point, and then I will dial out. Basically, my thinking is if I can go from 100 metres and I can dial vertically to, say, 500 metres, hit the gong, dial down to 400 metres, hit the gong, dial down to 300 metres, hit the gong, I've got my data pretty much right, and I've got a load that's performing the way I would expect it to. And then I'll do a bit more practice with it from there and see, does that consistently in a range of weather conditions, does that behave the way I would expect it to? Am I hitting well? Am I seeing good groups if I'm shooting paper? Am I hitting what I'm aiming at? Is the wind deflection doing what I would expect it to do? They're the sort of things that I'm looking for, and it's just trying to just verify that it's behaving the way I want it to.
Yeah. So to get to that point then, after you load a range of powder weight charges, and then are you doing a single shot, measuring the velocity, doing a ladder test? Are you doing a 3-shot group, a 5-shot group? How are you sort of determining which powder charge weight you're going to settle on?
It's pretty simplistic these days. I've done a lot of stuff, and I've really come back to I will chronograph the load, and when people talk about nodes, it's essentially where the harmonics have hit a point where if you increase the load, the barrel is not really responding significantly differently across several different charge weights. And that is a very forgiving load at that point. I mean, what people have got to understand is that, we talked about temperature sensitivity earlier. Temperature changes over the day are going to cause some amount of change in the load and the way that behaves. There are things that you can do to mitigate that, like putting a tuner on your barrel. That helps to extend that range of the way the powder responds with the charge, the node, whatever you want to call it. But you're going to get a degree of variability from that. One of the things that I think people possibly don't understand, I see again on a lot of forums, somebody will come on and say, I've tried this bullet and powder combination and I'm not getting the results that I'm looking for. And somebody will say, well, have you worked up in 0.1 grain increments? If your load is that sensitive where 0.1 of a grain goes from not working to working, you are in a really bad space, because over the course of the day, the temperature range, the change of the temperature over the course of the day is going to have more impact than 0.1 of a grain is going to have.
Yep. So
I don't think there's any point in having those really fine increments, and it's just a waste of time, powder, components. It's really, I don't see the point of it. I will go with pretty coarse increments, maybe half grain, maybe even full 1 grain. I mean, I'm not going to test a large range of powder weights. As I said, I'm going to go to something around the middle to the little bit over middle towards top charge. I'm going to chronograph them. If I see that, say I chronograph a load and I don't get a significant change in the velocity across 2-3 charges, I'm then going to go to about the middle of that, and I'm going to shoot that for a while and see what it does. And the reason I go to the middle is I want to be in the middle of that node. I want to be in the middle of that that forgiving charge, where if it gets a little bit hotter, a little bit colder, it sort of has the impact on the load of having a little bit more powder, a little bit less powder. It's a forgiving window that I'm sitting in the middle of. That's the most important, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. And look, yeah, the charge weight variation there that you're talking about, like in your 338 Edge, it's very similar capacity to my 338 Ultra Mag. I'm loading 90 plus grain of 2225 in that. So changing that by 1 grain is 0.9%.
Yep.
So, when you're talking about, like some people talk about, going up in 0.2 or 0.3 grain increments to test those loads, you're changing that by, such a minute percentage that you're really probably not getting, or I don't think you're getting a really good, and you're just wasting components. It's not giving you valuable data, and you're just wasting powder and bullets and so forth.
Yeah, and look, some people enjoy the process and really feel that it's important. I just don't see the benefit of it. I definitely, again, I see people at the range where they seem to be endlessly developing loads every weekend. When I'm there, they're doing their load development, whereas I'm there practicing. I'm there practicing my shooting. I'm not there endlessly developing a load. I try and get onto that load as quickly as I can, and then I will practice with it, So I'm not trying to alter things. I'm not trying to tweak anything. I'm just there to practice with my equipment and practice with the load and see what it does under, relatively varied field conditions. To me, that's what's important, not trying to tweak it to the nth degree because, again, signal to noise is very difficult to quantify. Well, am I actually seeing something better? Is it just the conditions today? Is it less wind this week than it was last week? There's so many variables, and the further you go out, the more those variables affect things, and trying to actually isolate what is driving the change. Is it the wind today? Am I seeing a little bit of vertical because there's a little bit of a berm there that is being affected today because of the wind direction? All those sorts of things. So I don't really see the point of trying to, again, it's that over-analysis aspect where, humans, I think by our nature, we like to control things and we like to do things and feel like we're achieving something, but in many cases, we're just wasting time and components. So I just don't see the benefit.
Yep. Once you've found that load, then, do you go and do some group shooting?
Not a lot. I do a little. Excuse me. I do a little, and I like to shoot, a 5-shot group. If I see them all go in the hole, that's fantastic. It's really encouraging. If you've put down 5-6 rounds, they all go together. It's a great start. But for me, again, I want to see what it does over a few ranges, a few distances. That to me, once I know that I've got a round that I can have a cartridge developed that I can have a bit of confidence in, then it's more about just trying to verify that across a range of different shooting positions, across a range of different distances, and as I said earlier, just shooting in mild wind, strong wind, and just trying to make sure that it does perform the way I really think that it's got the potential to. It seems like it's going well. Does it continue to go well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And are you, at that initial stage, are you measuring velocities continuously? And if what device are you using to do that?
So generally I'm only chronographing loads when I'm inside 100 metres. Anything beyond that gets a little bit more complicated. So I've used a lot of chronographs, and a lot of the old chronographs used to drive me mad. The best I had found up until recently was the LabRadar. That's been a really good step forward. Unfortunately, LabRadar really dropped the ball. They just never developed the technology that they launched, and they really set the standard, and they had a lot of opportunity to run with it, but, they did nothing. And, of course, now we've got the Garmin coming out, which is a fantastic one. I haven't got a Garmin as yet. I certainly don't dispute that they're a great device, but I sort of stuck with my LabRadar because, A, I've got it, and B, I know it very well. But something like one of those sort of more modern chronographs is just a really great aid. But for me, once I've got a decent amount of chronograph data. I'll take a range of velocities and I'll average them out, and then I'll say, all right, well, that's my average speed, and that's what I then put into my ballistic calculator, and I start shooting off that data. And most situations I don't need to true it up that much. I'll find that I would say 80-90% of the time I'm pretty accurate using, like LITS data for the ballistic coefficients and the chronograph data for my velocities, and I can mostly go out and hit pretty consistently when I'm practicing from there.
Yeah. When you've measured all those, how much does extreme spread and standard deviation matter to you?
It doesn't. I do not really monitor that closely at all. It's possible to get good results with something that has standard deviation or extreme spread that doesn't look good, but the performance is there in the load, and the performance is what I care about, not the theory. So you can get a lot of this just comes back to what I was talking about, where people tend to analyze ballistics or bullets or some variable that they'll obsess over, and they'll narrow it down to something where they say, well, this is the best and this is the one I'm going to focus on. And your barrel just might not like that bullet, or that component might just not work for you. And it doesn't really matter what the theory says. It's, it's a bit like the old poking fun at economist jokes where, Ronald Reagan made fun of economists because they were the only people that cared about the theory of something rather than the practicality of it. Is that corner the perfect site for a restaurant? No, because if it was, somebody would have already built a restaurant there. Right. It's really, does it actually perform? That's what's important, not whether in theory it does or it doesn't. So I don't chase it. If I have low standard deviation, if I have good extreme spread, that's great, no problem, happy to have it. But if I'm seeing good results on the target, and I'm getting something that in theory is not a good extreme spread, I'm not going to try and refine it. If I'm hitting what I'm aiming at out to distance, that's what's important. I don't care beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. What, just on that topic then, what would you consider to be a good and a bad example of standard deviation? Like, what numbers would you get that might concern you?
Look, I've had loads that I've been happy with that are, in the 50 to 100 range, and I'm not that worried about it. Obviously there's some people out there that want single digits, and that's really important to them, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, as I said earlier, if something makes you feel better, you should do it. I'm not trying to say these things are something that I don't focus on, therefore no one should do them, because if they make you feel better, then that's great. But if I'm getting, I for example, in 500 meter fly, I put 5 shots in the center bull, which is a 1.4 inch center from memory, with what would have been a national record at the time, although they didn't keep records then, it wasn't a nationally recognised discipline. I couldn't tell you what the extreme spread or standard deviation was for that load. I just don't know. If I'm hitting, off a rest, off a bench, that's obviously for shooting at that sort of level, you're not shooting prone in the middle of the bush, but, you are shooting in an environment where you have to be shooting at the highest standard. But what I'm looking at is, what does my bullet do on target? I don't care about, once I have my velocities, I just want to know, what do I have to dial up to hit where I want to hit? And, how does the wind affect it? Those are the things that matter to me, not what does theory say, whether this is a good load or not a good load. That is just the way I look at it. And I have never seen a situation where that's been a factor. As I say, I know guys that are very into the extreme long range side of things, and they would look at it differently, and that's appropriate for their environment because, once you're shooting out at, 2+ kilometres, that's really important. But that's not my game, and I don't really obsess over that level of detail. It's just not important to me.
Yep. All right. Well, that's good to know. That's interesting because a lot of the sort of, and I know that a lot of this is driven by marketing, and companies are trying to sell equipment and all of that sort of thing. But yeah, there seems to be a real hyper focus at the moment on ES and SD.
Look, the problem with the marketing world is that they're trying to distill down very complex things into something that they can easily say, this is good and this is bad. And, it's important from a marketing perspective. We see it with many, many things. There's very little, you can't market nuance. I mean, but this stuff is very nuanced. That's the reality of it. There's a lot of things that are important. There's a lot of things that are little details. But, people that are into long-range shooting often are gadget freaks. We like to focus on gadgets and numbers and what have you. Yep. That's what marketers are selling. They're selling us gadgets. They're selling us the idea that these things are going to help us. They're going to make a massive difference in our shooting. Nobody's out there marketing, go and train more. But that's really in this whole conversation is once you've got that load, I don't see the point of sitting there tweaking it. What I want to do is sit there and shoot the load and get comfortable with it, get familiar with it, understand what it does under a range of different conditions. It's not the sexy stuff. It's not buy another gadget because it's going to improve your life. I like gadgets. I own gadgets. But at the end of the day, it's training that matters. You've got to spend your time, money and effort in things that really will make you a better shooter. And I think that there's an expectation with an element of the shooting community that I've invested a lot of money in great top-level equipment, and so I'm capable of all of these things. I can shoot to whatever distance and, the technology is going to do all the work for me, and that's just not the case. You've got to understand it, know how to use it. You've got to be familiar with it. You've got to maximise the capability of everything that you've invested in, and practice is the answer. And, so marketing, obviously, the shooting industry, the reality is you don't need to buy a lot of new cartridges, not a lot of new rifles that shoot the new cartridges to be effective. I mean, I like rifles. I have a lot of rifles. I like to play with cartridges. It's all great stuff, and I'm not knocking anybody who wants to buy a new rifle. But the reality is that the industry relies on bringing out something new every year to be able to say that they're developing stuff and to be able to say you need this new thing. But in most cases, you don't. You just don't need it.
Yeah. So we'll come back to your reloading room now. Take us through the items that you feel are essential for people to get into reloading for long-range hunting.
So I think, as I said earlier, something like a good quality single stage press like a Rock Chucker or a Redding, there's a number of them, Forster presses. There's a number of good quality single stage presses out there. Good dies, good quality dies. Ideally for me, that's a full-length bushing die for sizing the cases, and for me it's an arbor press and an inline die for seating. There are many good micrometer dies that will seat very well from a conventional press. One of the things I should probably just touch on, one of the things I really like about the arbor press setup with the dies is once I've got that seating depth set up, it's consistent. I'm never going to you miss out because I've got that seating stem locked into the die.
Yep.
The die just sits in the arbor press. I seat the bullet and it's done, and that doesn't change whether I do it today or next week or what have you. There is the capacity for little, if you're not on your game, you could maybe miss the fact that you haven't quite adjusted your seating die to the same point you adjusted it last time and screw something up in your seating. So I think that is an advantage. But there, a micrometer seating die is a good thing. There's a number of those on the market. Hornady seating dies are quite good. They've got that sleeve in them that basically slides inside the die and it just helps guide the projectile. I mean, all of those will produce good ammunition. I like to use a K&M priming tool. There's a few others on the market. They are adjustable for the amount of force that you put on the primer. I think that's an important thing. I think some of the more mass-produced, mass-market priming tools, you can over-exert the pressure onto the priming compound. In the worst case, you will crack the priming compound and you will have a fail to fire. Mm-hmm. So having the ability to adjust the amount of pressure that you're putting on the primer when you're seating it, to me, is an advantage. Sinclair, there's a few others that are mainly catering to the match shooters, 21st century, number of seating tools out there now. Any of those I think are good because you can actually put more or less force, and you might need a little bit more force on a given cartridge, maybe a little bit less on another cartridge. You're certainly not going to be indenting the primer. If you've got some of those mass market tools, you can put so much force on the primer that you're actually pushing into the primer and leaving a mark on the primer. And as I say, you then risk actually breaking the primer compound, which will cause it to not fire. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I think is probably worth seeking out, a good quality priming tool. Beyond that, I do anneal with an AMP annealer pretty much every time. I think that's really helpful for both the consistency of the neck tension and also to avoid work hardening the necks and causing them to split, so just prolonging the brass life. And the AMP annealer is just so easy to use, so consistent, it's quite fast. So that's my preference there. I know there are other cheaper options on the market. I can't really speak to those. I haven't used them, but I do. It's probably one of the most expensive things on my loading bench that I really think is worthwhile. Mm-hmm. And beyond that, I think, probably the next thing I would probably put money into is, good quality components. So good quality brass, good quality bullets, Burger bullets. The Hornady ELDMs are quite a good bullet and fairly widely available. Burgers should hopefully become more available because they've just done a commercial arrangement, I understand, with OSA, so they should be more available at a regular gun shop pretty soon. Yeah. So that will help the average guy in the street that maybe didn't seek out some of the specialist suppliers like BRT when they were in business. Mm. To me, those are quite important, using good components. There's probably not many other things. I mean, I guess I'm skipping over a few things that I probably use and don't even think about it. A micrometer, something that lets me measure the bullet seating depth, lets me measure the shoulder pushback. I prefer to use something like a wax, what was the old Sinclair's wax? What's that now? The Redding lube. Yeah. Those sorts of things. None of those are critical. I can certainly still size with just about any lubricant, but I do like the wax style lubricant. Use the Hornady unique case lube a bit as well. They're all good. They're relatively easy to clean off. I guess my process is probably a little bit more hands-on than a lot of people who are using, say, progressive presses where they're just, every time they pull a lever, a case falls out, sort of thing, a cartridge falls out. I'm manually lubing cases, and then I'm manually cleaning cases. So that is a bit slower than perhaps what some people would be bothered with. So I'm probably doing a few more labour-intensive processes that way. But otherwise, I don't think the equipment I'm using is particularly remarkable in most cases.
And you said before you're just using the RCBS Charge Master.
Yes, yeah. That's been very good in my experience. I have used that same one for a long time. I mean, I have also used a Harold's powder thrower, and I've found that to be fairly consistent and produced good loads for me, but I've gone away from that, and I just really rely on the Charge Master now for most things, and that does the job for me. You know, I pretty much, I'll throw each one of those and double check a few of them, but I don't really, it's been reliable enough that I don't feel like I need to check a lot now. I'm pretty much just throw a charge from the Charge Master, make sure it's at the load that the Charge Master's set to, because it does have the potential to more overthrow than underthrow. And if I get an overthrow, I'll either manually just take a couple of points of a grain out, or if I'm really uncomfortable with it, I'll just dump it back into the hopper and go again. But 99% of the time, I'll just take the charge that it throws and dump it straight into the cartridge and seat the bullet, and I'm good. And, you know, again, my results on target have given me the confidence that works.
Are you measuring the charges on a secondary scale, or you're just running with
I don't much now. I have done that. I have a few digital scales, so I have certainly thrown it on the Charge Master, then thrown it on another scale just to verify it. But I have found that really hasn't been necessary, so I really stopped doing it.
Yeah. I guess I'm a little shocked, to be honest, that you're using that as the scales. Again, this probably comes back to the marketing that I'm believing, but I would have thought high level competition shooters would all be using, you know, at least an A&D scale or something of similar sort of quality.
Yeah, and they're a great scale. I'm not saying no one should use one, but I just feel like there is it goes back to that analysis aspect. There's too much emphasis on the technology, and I'm not saying that the technology is a waste of money. I mean, if people want to buy the technology and use it, that's great. I mean, you know, that style of auto trickler, they are a very fast, efficient way to throw powder. It's great. You know, if someone wants to use one, go for it, no problem. I just don't think it comes back to what I was saying sort of earlier in the conversation. I think for somebody getting into it, it can just be really intimidating. People look at all the technologies that's there, sort of feel like, well, I can't afford to invest $10,000 on a reloading press, a powder thrower, a case trimmer and an annealer, and therefore I can't get started. Yeah. But the reality is you can invest way less money than that and produce good ammunition straight off the bat, you know. I mean, those things like an auto trickler, they're a great tool, you know, but I haven't felt the need to go to one. You know, I have shot at distance a lot and been competitive, and you know, that's what I rely on, I guess. I mean, if I keep saying it, I guess if I'm seeing the results on the target, then I'm not going to question the technology I'm using to get there.
Yeah. I think that's one of Brian Litz's catch cries, isn't it? To believe the target.
And I think it can be really difficult to actually identify, is this my equipment or is this me? You know, when you're trying to actually get down to that, get the nth degree out of your equipment, and, you know, I mean, your optics, your rifle, your reloading gear, the components you've chosen to use, it's really difficult. There are times when categorically you do need to dump something in your equipment, but there are other times when it's you and it's not your equipment. And that's only something you'll get with experience. And I think that's one of the benefits of competition, because you get you get exposure to good shooters, and you get people to bounce ideas off, so you get that second opinion, which is really helpful. You get to see the standard that other people are at, and whether you're actually as good, or your loads are as good, or what have you, as you think that they are. And from a hunting perspective, it also puts you under pressure. So, it's sort of no competition simulates hunting, but it gives you a degree of difficulty that you don't get just in practice, where there's really no consequence to anything that you do other than what you judge yourself. But in a competition environment, there's a winner, there's a loser. You make mistakes on the clock, the time pressure, the competing against others pressure, the fact that you can't sit there and wait for the ideal time to pull the trigger because you're on the clock and you've got to shoot right now. All of those factors really help as well. But, over time, you hopefully will get better at understanding, well, is this me? Is this the equipment? Do I need to, do I have a bad scope? Do I have a bad barrel? Have I bought cheap bullets that aren't performing for me? Whatever. There's a lot of things that can be difficult to categorically sort through and say, yes, this is helping me, no, this is not helping me. And that ultimately just comes down to experience. But I think there's too much of an emphasis on, if I buy the best gear, then I'm capable of doing all of this stuff. That's the thing that I think we see more of. I mean, most of my rifles have been custom built for a long time. I mean, back when I was getting rifles built in the 1990s, it was very unusual for people to get custom built rifles with custom barrels and all those sorts of things. Nowadays, it's way more accepted. People are, not batting an eyelid about buying, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 rifles and then putting $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 scopes on them. I mean, it's great we have those choices. Fantastic. We've got more options on optics and good rifles and good barrels and good components than even 10 years ago. I mean, the range of stuff now is fantastic. But just because you've spent a lot of money on your gear doesn't equal capability. It's just a good basis. And from there, it's trying to sort through it all and work out what works for you. And, there is no formula for that, and there is no guarantee from technology that it'll get you there.
Yeah. All right. So then the next question is, what is your reloading process? So I don't know if you want to start with a new case and include that at the first part of it, or whether you're going to start with a fired case. But just take us through your whole process to end up with a ready to shoot round.
So I probably, with a new case, I don't do too much different, except that I might run all of the case necks over a mandrel just to make sure that they're all, they're not beaten up, especially if it's something like if it's a Lapua case, I probably wouldn't even bother doing that if it's premium brass. But if it's a mass market brand, I would probably run them over a mandrel first. But otherwise, I basically start, if I've got a fired case, my first step that I'm going to do is clean the carbon off the necks. I just use 4.0 steel wool for that. Just basically give them a clean with the steel wool.
So is that inside or outside?
That's outside. I don't care about the inside. That's basically lubricating the neck.
Okay, yep.
So I don't run a brush through the necks or anything like that. I just basically skip over that. I then will size, so I manually apply a lubricant, which is typically a wax, and then I will, once I've got the sizing die adjusted, I will run them all through that. So as I said, it's a bushing die. I'm not using an expander ball, so I'm just basically sizing the case down, poking the primer out, and I'm not touching the neck with anything other than the bushing. Then I will manually clean the case and that's one of the reasons why I like the wax. They're very consistent on sizing the case, and they're pretty quick to clean up, so I just use a microfiber cloth. If I've got any concerns, I don't want residual lubricant left on the case. If I've got any doubt, I might run them through a little tub of shellite just to give them a rinse, and that will flash off, and obviously I'll let them dry out completely before I do anything else. But I don't do that the majority of the time. I will keep an eye on the primer pockets, and every so often I might run them over a priming pocket tool, but I generally don't. I will check the overall case length. I probably, because I'm minimally sizing and I'm using the neck bushing, I can probably go, I don't know, somewhere in the region of 8 to 10 reloads before I need to trim cases in most situations. And of course that also is a case design function. I don't have too many cartridges that are really sloped shoulders that are going to move a lot of brass. So I will check I'll randomly grab cartridges and check them just to make sure that they are under the maximum length. And generally that maximum length is something that I'll talk to the gunsmith about when they chamber my barrel, so it'll go off the reamer. It's not necessarily, or in most cases I should say, it's not an industry number, because I might have something custom throated or what have you. So it's based on the cartridge specific reamer, rather than just off the number that would be generally regarded for a SAMI round, because a lot of my stuff may not actually be SAMI. Even if it's a SAMI cartridge, I might have modified it in some way with a throat or something. And then once I've done all of those steps, I will anneal, so they go through the AMP, and I have a book that I refer back to, so I'll keep basically where I write down all my load data, I'll also write in things like the anneal codes and that sort of thing. So I will run them through the AMP, and then once I've done that, then basically I'm ready to prime. So I'll sit down with the K&M tool and just run through pretty much individually prime. I'm not that concerned about, people get very obsessive about, the oil from their fingers on a primer. I really don't care about that. I must admit, I've seen a multi-time world champion using a set of tweezers to feed his primers into his priming tool, and he has shot better than me, so maybe there's something to it. But I mean, in all seriousness, I've never had a failure to fire that I could remotely link back to seeding a primer. I mean, I just don't think that the studies that I've seen on primers, the things that I've seen actually making a difference is immersing a primer in oil for a week and then it won't go off. Right. Actually touching a primer with the oils on your fingers, I think is irrelevant. Might have been a concern with primers before we used the compounds that we use today to seal the primers. Yep. But really, it's a non-issue. So I manually feed the primer into the priming tool and seat the primer. So that is a one by one because of the K&M priming tool that I'm using. I'm not using a tray to feed them in or anything like that. It's just the nature of that particular tool.
So just a quick question on your primer seating. Are you seating them up against the base of the primer pocket, or are you seating them flush with the case bottom? How are you gauging that?
I'm seating them into the primer until they stop on the primer pocket. But one of the reasons why I only will use a primer uniforming tool intermittently and only really to clear out carbon buildup. So I don't want to be modifying that case in any way. If I would expect that when I seat that primer, the base of the primer is pretty much flush with the cartridge, but I'm not gauging it to achieve that. I mean, I should be seating it to the point where it's seating home to fill the primer pocket to the base of the primer pocket, and that should then also be flush with the base of the cartridge.
Yeah. Okay. If it's I'm finding that my primers are not flush with the base, that they're visibly deeper, but I'm not having any issues with ignition or anything like that. And yeah, what I've sort of heard is that it needs to be up against the bottom of the primer pocket.
Yes. Yeah. No, I agree with that. That's the most important thing.
Okay. All right. Yep.
So from there, basically, I move on to dropping powder, as we spoke about, which I just used the Charge Master for. And the Charge Master, the one fault the Charge Master really has is it's not as fast as something like the Auto Trickler. The Auto Trickler is great from a speed and accuracy perspective. But normally what I do is I just throw the charge with the Charge Master, dump it into the case, put the pan back on the Charge Master and seat the bullet with the arbor press. And by the time I finish seating the bullet, the Charge Master's thrown the next charge. Yep. And I just keep repeating that cycle till I've got however many cartridges loaded that I want.
Yep. Okay. So you don't tumble clean your brass or sonic clean or anything like that? You just...
No, I don't. Other than the case necks, I really... Look, if my brass was really, like if it had been in the mud or something like that, if I went to a PRS match and I was throwing all my cases out of my action into mud, I would, of course, clean all of that off. But generally, no, I almost never tumble brass. I don't care. Look, a guy that I used to shoot with would polish his brass with Brasso because it upset him to not have gleaming brass. I mean, I don't care what my brass looks like, and that was very upsetting to him. But to me, the most important part in terms of cleaning is the case neck, and the cartridge. Of course, you shouldn't see carbon on your cases anyway, because that would be an indication that you're not sealing the chamber properly. It's either an excessive load that's leaking out of the brass, because the cartridge is essentially a gasket that's sealing your chamber. Yep. So if it's not generating enough gas to properly seal the chamber, you're going to see carbon on the case. And if you're shooting something that's so hot that it's leaking out, you're going to see carbon on the case. But other than those two extremes, you shouldn't see any carbon on the case. Yep. So I don't really see a need to tumble or polish the cartridges. I mean, a lot of times people are lubing the cartridges and then tumbling them because they want to remove the lube, but I just dislike that. And, most of the media, I've heard enough stories and seen enough myself where, you get something caught in the flash hole, so you're blocking up the flash primer, exactly. And, the ignition and the ignition system on your rifle are super, super critical. So I'm not comfortable putting them at risk, I guess, and I just do everything manually, as in cleaning the cartridge and basically running through the manual cleaning of that case does have a cleaning, like, as well as removing the lube, it has a cleaning function.
Yep. So what's your theory then behind the steel wool on the case neck?
It's just removing the carbon. It's a non-aggressive way of taking off the carbon and not really doing anything to the neck. I mean, there are cloths that you can buy, but I just don't like one of the things I don't like is lubing case necks. I think that sort of the interior of case necks. I mean, well, even the exterior. I don't want the risk of putting any lubricant into the case, because that becomes a real variable about your case neck tension at that point. Because very difficult to get case neck lube into a case and have that done in an exact way. It becomes a big variable that I don't want to introduce. So I just am cleaning the carbon off the neck. It's not essential. If you were to skip that step, it probably wouldn't do any harm, at least a little bit, but I just don't like the build-up of carbon on the neck. It's one of the few things that annoys me.
Okay. So it's maybe more of a appearance and OCD thing for you rather than actual problematic.
Look, I think if you let it build up, you've got the potential of a variable on your sizing of the neck,
right.
Which I want to avoid. And again, I'm not obsessive. Like I'm not trying to polish my necks. I'm just trying to take off that bit of carbon each time I fire it. I just don't think that the build-up of carbon on the neck is a good thing.
Yep.
Sizing that neck consistently is important, and I feel like a film of carbon on it isn't a good thing. And at the end of the day, it's an abrasive. I don't really want it on my cases going through the dye. But it's not something that I'm going to obsess over. As I say, if I skipped it, if I was in a hurry and I didn't have time to clean case necks and I just sized cases and went out and shot them, I wouldn't feel bad about it. But I just prefer to do it each time.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you take your loads then out to the range, and because one of the things that I want with this podcast is to encourage people to get into reloading or start considering it. I recognise that this day and age there's some very high quality factory ammunition out there using very good projectiles as well. Then like the Hornady Precision Hunter with the ELDX and that sort of thing. So it is a cost versus benefit sort of debate that people are going to have with themselves. But it is, it's a load of fun as well. So, yeah, I really want to encourage people. But one of the things that people are worried about is the things that people have said to me is that they were worried they would do something wrong and then blow up their rifle, which I try to explain is actually quite difficult to do unless you're actually, using the wrong powder and things like that. So it's not impossible, but it can be done. But that just comes back to having your systems in place and, making sure that your bench is clear so you don't mix up powders and things like that. But what are some of the warning signs that you're looking for when you're testing loads that would indicate high pressure or something else is going wrong?
Yeah, it's a good point because, firstly, some of the conventional signs that we would look for and find pressure, excessive pressure, can also be replicated in situations where they're not because of pressure. So it can be confusing when you're getting started. So the things I would normally look for would be the condition of the primer, any marks on the case head. So, for example, if it's got a either a swipe mark from being difficult to extract, open the bolt and extract the cartridge, that puts a mark on the case head. That's not a good sign. Mm-hmm. Or if you get an extrusion mark where you're basically seeing the ejector making a mark on the case head, none of those things are good. The ultimate pressure sign really is the expansion of the case. Well, there's probably two things. One thing people often overlook is the beauty of a chronograph is it's going to tell you if you're over pressure, because if you're getting ridiculously fast loads, it's not something to be celebrated. It's something to be, why the hell am I getting this? So don't discount the chronograph as a tool for telling you when you're getting into excessive pressure territory. And again, there's a lot of variables, so it's hard, because obviously if you've got a really long barrel, you're going to get more velocity than a really short barrel. There's a lot of things that come into play there. But if you're being told by the loading manual that you should be getting, 3,000 feet a second, and you fire that bullet and you get 3,200 feet a second, you want to be really looking at why the hell did that happen, because that's just not what you should be expecting. Mm-hmm. But the other main thing that I would look at is the performance of the case, and as in case stretching, and a really good way, not an easy thing to do at a range for the average person, but a good way to test that would be to reload the same case 10 times. And if you get to like 6, 7, 8 firings and the primer falls out, then you're over pressure. Okay. That's really a good way of telling. Now, you would need something like a micrometer to actually accurately measure that on the case head, but case head expansion really tells you a lot about the pressure you're generating.
Right. Yep. So would it be advisable to be measuring the case head before and after when you're testing?
Look, I think it's a good thing, and doing it cumulatively too. So if you fire that cartridge, I don't know, 3 times and you see growth every single time, you're probably over pressure.
Right.
But the one thing that I should mention, because I've been fooled by this early on in the piece, when you fire form a cartridge for the first time, when you fire a cartridge in your chamber for the first time, especially if you're forming something like an Ackley improved case or something like that, depending on how you're set up, if you have created a situation where that cartridge is moving somewhat in the chamber, you can get a lot of pressure signs on something that is not over pressure, because your cartridge is actually moving enough in the chamber that it's flattening the primer, or it's causing the extractor to leave a mark in the case head. But it's just because of the movement of the case rather than the pressure of the cartridge, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you can actually get false positives where you look at a cartridge and go, oh, wow, that was over pressure. It actually wasn't. So, again, it's an experience thing, being able to say, well, no, actually, that's just forming that cartridge. You shoot it again, you're not going to see that. But, I mean, just to give you an example, we were shooting my son's, and now we formed that case off a 30 grain of 2208 load, and we tested it with up to 31 grains of 2208 to form the cases, and that seemed 31 grains seemed safe, but we got a good enough result, nice clean crisp shoulders with 30 grains, so we stuck with that. And then I took some powder out to the range and I tried 31 grains with a formed case, expecting that to be a pretty mild load to start with, and I saw quite a flat primer, which really surprised me. And I stopped at that point. I was expecting to go to 32 and maybe even 33 grains with that particular bullet in that particular cartridge, but it just did not seem safe. So it's really important to pay attention to what's happening, even though maybe the manual says that you can go hotter. If you've got a tight barrel, maybe you can't go hotter. Maybe you're stuck at a minimum load. That can happen, you know. So just because a manual says that a safe load range is from X charge to Y charge doesn't mean in your rifle that is safe. So it's really important to understand the signs that you're seeing.
And I think you sort of touched on it before. It is possible to get that, because quite often the primer seems to be what people refer to as being, you know, the first indicator to look for of overpressure. But it is quite possible to get false positives from that. So you might see a primer that, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but you might see a primer that appears to be flattening out, and maybe there is a little bit of flow back around the firing pin, but it's for some other reason.
Yeah, I mean, I had a match rifle, just as an example. I had a match rifle where I could shoot a fairly mild load on that, and I would still get extrusion of the primer down the firing pin hole, and I ended up having to get that firing pin hole bushed because it was giving me false positives every time. I mean, if I used that one marker, I was over pressure on everything I shot, and the reality was I knew I wasn't over pressure because I was seeing no other signs. So I think looking at multiple signs is important, you know. So like if you see a flat primer, that's more than likely a sign of overpressure, and I'd certainly be really looking at everything else at that point. You can get a pretty flat primer from fire forming a cartridge for the first time, but generally speaking, a really flat primer is a bad thing. A somewhat flat primer may not be anything to be particularly alarmed at. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you want to look for multiple signs. You don't want to just look at one thing and go, yes, I'm safe, no, I'm not safe, because it can be misleading, either above or below, the charge weight. So it's something where I think if you're seeing flat primers extruding down the firing pinhole, and you're seeing some case head expansion, that for sure would look like an excessive load. At the extreme end, you'll get what's referred to as blanking the primer. So that's where the primer actually punches a disc out of the primer itself into the firing pinhole, and you'll end up with a tiny disc of primer case inside the firing pin, which you need to clean out, or you run the risk of a couple of them jamming up your firing pin. And that is a very unsafe sign. But if you want to be looking for, I think, a few different things. Ideally, you want to be looking for, are the primers flattening? Are you seeing the extractor, if it has one? Is that indenting into the case head? Are you getting hard bolt lift? Because, of course, that's an indicator that you're starting to get excessive expansion of the case. Although if you're not sizing the case adequately, you can start to see hard bolt lift on a perfectly safe load just because you're not sizing the case down enough.
Right. So where are some people want to get into reloading and up their game for those that are already reloading? Where are some sources and suppliers for equipment and components that you would recommend for people? Because now that unfortunately BRT they've retired, so it's no longer a source. I know that some other providers have taken over, some other suppliers, have taken over parts of their business. So yeah, where should people be looking at and so forth?
So, I mean, in terms of buying components, there's a number of specialty providers out there. I mean, a lot of the state National Rifle Association shops sell a lot of the similar things to what BRT sold. QRA's probably got the best range out of all of those state associations, and of course they took over quite a lot of what BRT handled. So they have a really good range of relatively specialised components. There's a number of people, small providers, which I can't name all of them off the top of my head, that sort of fill a lot of these niches. Maxord is one that's come out recently. They're carrying some good stuff and their prices look quite reasonable. They're selling Alpha Brass. There's the Night Force ARPS, whatever they want to call themselves, Gun Force. There's Night Force in South Australia. They've got quite a good retail setup. They're Euro Optic in Australia as well. But they have a lot of good components. As I say, I think Burger bullets will be easier to get. Hopefully that would be the plan soon, because they should be under a national distribution arrangement. I believe there's a container load of stuff on its way as we speak. And, I mean, a lot of those local suppliers have a good range of things on hand. You can somewhat mail order stuff out of America, but because of regulations, it can be really difficult to get anyone in America wanting to send anything out of the country. And I mean anything. I once tried to get a case neck expander from an American supplier, and they told me I needed an export permit for it. So, which I don't agree with that you needed that, but I wasn't going to argue with them. It was all just too hard. So, I mean, we have some good local suppliers, and it's good to support those guys. And, there's a lot of little niche providers out there. And again, I think a lot of that stuff, word of mouth, you'll get a handle when you start to get into some of those communities, whether it be competition shooting or, some of the other groups that support some of this sort of stuff. And in terms of how do you get started, I mean, obviously get a good reloading manual. ADI have a lot of that data on their website now, so you've got a pretty good chance of getting a safe load just by going to the website and putting in your cartridge. And they don't necessarily have data for every cartridge, but they have it for a lot. And you can always email them and say, look, I'm shooting this cartridge. It's not on your website. They will often be able to give you data.
Okay.
And also, if you're shooting a particular bullet and you're not finding the data, you can talk to the bullet manufacturer in America, get data off them. If you look at the ADI data equivalency, powder equivalency listing, you can generally work out, if you get told to use H1000, you can work out what the ADI equivalent is. You can always ask them. They'll often tell you that stuff.
Yep.
And there's some good stuff on YouTube. I mean, being able to see the steps visually, I think, is a really good aid that wasn't available when I got started. So understanding things like, how much lube to put on a case, those sorts of things, being able to see that is actually quite powerful compared to just reading about it, because there's nuances there that you don't get by reading it, especially when you don't know what you're doing to begin with. So, there's some good tools online nowadays that weren't available when I got started, and I think they help, So I think between all of those, it gives you pretty good information to get started. And then as long as you don't do stupid stuff like just try and make up loads, and if as long as you work within what, say, the ADI data lists for ADI powders for a given cartridge, and you just stick with those and just experiment a bit, as in experiment to see what accuracy you get out of it, etc. You can't really do too much wrong. You've got to try pretty hard to do something really unsafe. And fortunately, modern firearms are pretty good at protecting the user as well. So, even if you do screw something up and go a little bit excessive, it's not going to really do anything dangerous. I mean, it's not encouraging it, but, it's hard to really do something super dangerous. Wear eye protection, because that is really important. I used to hate shooting with glasses, and I really resisted it. And then I had to wear glasses, and I realised I was just stupid all of those years, because it was really no detriment to shoot with glasses on. I would use safety glasses even if you don't need any glasses for optical clarity, because I just think, if anything lets go, that's really the thing that's the most at risk, really, is your eyes.
Yeah. I don't know whether you ever watch Kentucky Ballistics on YouTube. But
no, I generally steer clear of most of the really popular channels. They just irritate me too much.
I don't watch it myself, but my son does, and sometimes we'll sit down and watch TV together, and it'll be his turn to pick the YouTube channel. So anyway, it's probably worth actually watching just out of interest's sake. But there was one last year where he actually blew up a 50 BMG, and it nearly killed him. So it's not necessarily funny. But anyway, he was wearing safety glasses, and a couple of pieces of the rifle were lodged in the safety glasses, like right in front of where his eyeball was. So it would have cost him an eye had he not been wearing those as well.
Yeah, no, I think look, hopefully, nobody ever has a problem, and you have to try pretty hard to have a problem. But at the end of the day, if something happens, most things will deal with it, but your eyes won't. So, as I say, I think I look back and think, no, it was stupid. And with my son, it's actually a range requirement at the SSAA range where we shoot for any junior to wear safety glasses. But it was something that I basically forced my son to do right from the outset, and now he's used to it. And it's just something that I think's an important precaution, because if something bad happens, that's going to give you some protection that's important.
Yep. So how much weight do people need to put on reloading as opposed to quality rifle and scope? Like if somebody had a budget of $10,000, would you say to them to sort of split it up by by a percentage each way, or would you say go and spend it on this instead?
Look, it's hard to sort of fully break that down, but I mean, I would say you can get started with reloading and get really good results with a couple of $1,000 invested, and that includes a few sets of dies, so a couple of different cartridges at least. I think that a good press, a few sets of dies, maybe a charge master, something like that. You don't need it, but it is nice to have something like a charge master. You can get by with just an electronic scale, but it's going to be a lot slower process. So I think, you can get some pretty good results with that, and it's not really a requirement to have top-of-the-line stuff right across the board. I mean, buy the best you can afford. It's worth it in the long run because it's not like you're going to wear out a reloading press. If you do, you're doing something wrong. So those things, once you've got them, they will last a hell of a long time. A good rifle, yes, that's worthwhile. Having said that, I mean, the level of quality on factory bolt actions today, they should all shoot to a decent standard. I mean, MOA or sub-MOA should be possible between the firearm itself and reloading. And scopes, there are some beautiful optics out there, but even budget scopes are very good quality today compared to what they were. There's some really good quality, sub-$1,000 scopes out there today that are really capable. So you can get a pretty good package to get you going without spending massive amounts of money. The one thing I would say, I think in terms of, talking about where do you draw the line, is it more important to have a good rifle? Is it more important to reload and produce good ammo? I mean, producing good ammo is not going to turn a terrible rifle into a good shooting rifle. If you've got problems with a rifle, if it's just not achieving, if you produce hand loads and you're in any doubt, buy something like, Hornady match ammo with like factory loads with ELDMs, as you already touched on. It's very good quality ammunition. That also doesn't shoot well in that rifle. The problem is probably either your shooting technique or the rifle. Get someone else that knows how to shoot it. If it's still bad, it's the rifle. And then, I always say a bad shooting rifle is only a barrel change away from being a good shooting rifle. That's normally the variable in it. It's normally the barrel. It is possible for an action to cause accuracy problems, but it's far less common than having a barrel causing accuracy problems. So either sell the rifle to someone you don't like or rebarrel it. They're kind of the way forward as far as I'm concerned. But, I mean, within those parameters, you can cover a decent amount of ground with reloading in terms of ringing accuracy out of a rifle. As you said earlier, factory ammo these days is very good. It's more about the enjoyment of reloading, which it's a tedious process. Sometimes there's not a lot of enjoyment there, but the satisfaction of producing your own ammo and shooting well with it is definitely an ongoing thing. And the ability to tune and tailor ammo is I find it a really satisfying, enjoyable process.
Yeah. And really, nowadays, the used to be reloading. You got into it because one of the reasons you got into it was because you wanted to save cost. It used to be cheaper, theoretically. Used to be cheaper. Nowadays, I think it's more about that fine tuning and tailoring the ammunition to what you want, so you can have, some off the wall bespoke projectiles that you can't get factory loaded that you want to shoot, and there are some days when I walk away from the range and I think to myself, why the fuck do I do this? It's just been one of those days, and you think, that's it, I'm going to sell this rifle, I'm going to buy a standard caliber and buy factory ammo. And then there are other days you come home and you think, that was a really good day, I really enjoyed myself. So
yeah, hopefully you have more of the latter than the former. But yeah, I agree. I mean, some days it just doesn't come together for you and you're tearing your hair out. And other days you walk away feeling really good and feel like you've achieved something. But, hopefully you have more days where you feel like you've achieved something and, it's worth your while. It's worth the investment in all of the stuff. And, hopefully it does save you a bit of money. And I think the bottom line with reloading is, if you get shortages, you can sort of tailor something up with components you might not normally use, but they're what's available, and you can get it shooting, versus if you're completely dependent on factory ammo and that factory ammo just no longer is available in the country, then you're kind of at a roadblock at that point. So it just gives you a bit more flexibility.
Yep. All right, Fergus. Well, look, I'm probably going to look at wrapping it up there, because I think we've covered off on everything around the reloading.
Yep.
I want to thank you again for your time and for reaching out to me. I personally have found this really interesting because, I took the deep dive down reloading many years ago, and again, there's so many sources of information out there, and it's hard to sort of wade through it all sometimes to work out what you actually need to concentrate on. So I've come away a smarter reloader today, I feel.
Hopefully not a bored one.
No. I do feel that this podcast is probably going to generate some questions. So are you happy to share your contact details, whether that's social media or that sort of thing? Or do you think that maybe if we get the questions directed to me, we can look at doing a Q&A podcast down the track?
I think that's a good format. I mean, I'm happy to share social media contact details. That's not a problem. But I think, doing that rather than doing it, person by person as the questions get asked, maybe if they're directed to you, then we can try and address everyone's queries with a few answers. Maybe there's another podcast there in the future and we just talk through what those questions were and take it that way, perhaps.
Yeah, all right. And I think that there's another podcast as well that I'd like to sit down with you and then look at the next stage of long range hunting in terms of the actual mechanics of firing the rifle and setting it up, the shooting positions, all that sort of thing.
Yep, sounds good.
Yeah, all right. Hey, thank you for listening in. If you'd like to contact me for a chat, pass on any feedback, or have some ideas for future podcasts, please reach out to me on Instagram at Australian_hunting_backcountry, or email australian.hunting.backcountry@outlook.com.au. For now though, please look after yourselves and your mates.